He wants regulation to win back user trust, and South Korea's president warns the economy faces an emergency over the coronavirus. I'm Sandra Kilhoff with World News.
And not backing down, the man leading the UK's divorce talks tells Brussels not being bound by EU rules is the point of Brexit.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, on DAB Digital Radio London, Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington DC, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
A very good morning from London. I'm Roger Hearing.
And I'm Naira Chahich. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:01 a.m. in London, 9:01 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. And Roger, we wake up this morning with some more clarity on HSBC's strategy, much anticipated. We didn't get any kind of an update in terms of a potential new CEO. That's something that certainly analysts in the market had their eyes trained on. But we've heard about job cuts, as many as 35,000 jobs over 3 years. And it was the cost cuts that really stole the focus. The thing is, the share price reaction in Hong Kong, obviously the shares dropped as much as 3.2%. It leads you to wonder whether a lot of this cost cutting was priced in, but also what's likely to have concerned investors is the suspension of the buyback from 2020 to 2021. Coronavirus, also a very big uncertainty. Myself and Manus Cranny spoke to the CFO Ewan Stevenson on TV earlier. He said he expects to take an additional loss provision in the first quarter due to the weakened outlook on Hong Kong's economy, but they're keeping an eye on coronavirus, and longer term, obviously, it could get worse. It wasn't all negative, though. Fourth quarter pre-tax profit beat estimates.
Indeed, of course, and HSBC very exposed, however, to Asia, to China and Hong Kong particularly, so there's likely to be problems there.
Yeah, the other big... Well, what I was going to say on that, and that was one of the questions I asked, because what came out through this strategy is they're really, where the cuts are coming from and where they're downsizing the business is the US and Europe, and they want to make more of a pivot to Asia and the Middle East. And one of the questions I did ask you and Stevenson was, are you not concerned with all the challenges in Asia, Hong Kong protests, coronavirus, US-China trade, to pivot more in that direction? But he, was pretty bullish on that.
Well,
So
they've got to, it's their strategy, they've got to stick with it, at least for the moment. But the other interesting line, of course, was Apple, and they are directly affected by the coronavirus. In fact, they've been saying they're not, or may not meet their March target on that basis, and that is what does seem to have driven a lot of the markets down in Asia.
Yeah, and with Apple, I mean, China is their third biggest market in terms of revenue. And what really, to me, Apple highlighted was the risk of coronavirus, not just to the demand side, because there they talked about there have been store closures, less footfall in those stores, less demand from customers, but also the supply side risk, because this was about the supply chain too. So they've kind of been hit from both angles, both demand and supply, although a lot of analysts out there are kind of keeping their bullish targets on Apple, thinking it's just going to be a short-term hit.
We'll see. And what is very hit is the suppliers themselves for Apple, and we've certainly seen big issues there, a lot of concern. And South Korea talking about a major economic problem for them as a whole, just as a result of these things.
Yeah, and the Apple story certainly did seem to be what hit sentiment in the Asian session. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down more than 1%. Also, futures took a hit in Europe and the US in terms of how the equity market is opening up in Europe right now. 3 minutes into the equity market open, the Stoxx 600 is down almost 0.8%. This after it ended 0.3% in the green yesterday. Across regional equity benchmarks, the FTSE 100 is down almost 0.9%. The CAC 40 and DAX down about 0.8%. The IBEX and FTSE MIB in the red. Of course, we had no US stock trading yesterday. It was President's Day. Futures point to a lower open. Dow, S&P and NASDAQ futures all lower, and NASDAQ futures unsurprisingly leading the losses, given that a lot of the sentiment seems to be driven by what we heard from Apple. NASDAQ down almost 0.9% in terms of the futures. Dow and S&P futures down about 0.5%. The bond market certainly reflecting the concern and sentiment as well. The 10-year Treasury yield to a 154 handle down 4 basis points, but the 30-year yield also dropping below 2%. We're on a 199 handle now, down about 4.5 basis points. The 10-year Bund yield down 2.5 basis points to negative 43. 10-year gilt yield slips 2 basis points as well. Looking at the picture of risk in FX, the yen is bid, so that certainly tells you something. The Aussie and New Zealand dollar on the back foot. So those commodity commodity currencies coming under some pressure. And speaking of commodities, oil trading lower by more than 1%. WTI 51.40, Brent at 56.81. Copper retreating as well, Roger.
Well, let's have a look at what the stocks are to watch this morning. Bloomberg's Joe Easton joins us in our London studio, and unsurprisingly, Joe, we're looking at HSBC. So how's it seeming?
That's right. So we start with HSBC, and Naira mentioned a few points there in terms of the cost-cutting measures. And as Naira did say, some of those cost cuts were actually priced in terms of what analysts were expecting. So to give an example of that, analysts were forecasting around $31 billion in expenses in terms of the 2022 estimate, and the market was expecting around 33.5. So there's only actually a few $1 billion in terms of a better than expected expenses outlook from HSBC, and no updates on the CEO. So it begs the question, where is this main strategy coming from? It seems like it's mainly coming from the chairman, Mark Tucker. So while those cutbacks will be welcomed, they are priced in to an extent, and there'll also be some disruption on the revenue because of these changes. So it could cut revenue by around 2 to 3%. And of course, the big overhang is Hong Kong, where net interest margins continue to decline. This is not just due to coronavirus, but also due to the protests as well. That's quite surprising, given that Hong Kong interest rates have actually remained pretty steady despite the disruption. So the net interest margin decline is a bit of a disappointment for HSBC today.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, and what about UBI Banca? Some very interesting movements in that. A bid for, basically, Intesa San Paolo seems to be making a bid there.
That's right. So it's a surprise $5.3 billion bid in terms of the dollar amount. So around 4.9 billion euros. Intesa going in for UBI, this smaller bank. We haven't seen much M&A in Italy in terms of the banking sector at all. This is really due to the political uncertainty that continues to hang over the country and the financial sector in particular. Intesa does say it would boost their earnings by around 6% from 2019. So they do think it would be accretive to full year earnings. But it is being seen as a hostile takeover bid, so UBI are not welcoming the approach, according to people familiar with the matter that spoke to Bloomberg. But it could definitely see the stock jumping. Just seeing that one opening up, there was a delay on the open, but that stock UBI is up 22% today, so a huge move there, and Intesa shares up around 2%.
Yep, indeed. And just some movements, in fact, reflecting what we were talking about in Apple earlier. At the moment, Dialog Demi is opening down 6%. We're also seeing, AMS just opened, also down 4.6%. Now, Glencore is an interesting one because we've seen results on that, Joe. So it's an issue to do with coal, really, and pollution, I suppose.
So Glencore has had some write-downs over in their Colombia mines as well, in addition to these write-downs related to coal and oil pricing that you mentioned. Because of these write-downs, they haven't been able to announce a buyback. So this is a bit of a blow for investors at the moment. That stock opened down around 2%. It's kind of coming back a bit, up to around 0.6%, but it did report the lowest profit in 3 years for Glencore, and debt rose above its own target. So some disappointing numbers coming out of one of the biggest miners that we have. Of course, Glencore don't mine iron ore, which is where much of the profits have come from in the mining sector. They're much more focused on copper and other products. So that's where they've kind of missed out, and that's why investors have stayed away, and looking like they're staying away again. As I mentioned, that stock down, although perhaps down in line with the market, only down around 0.8% in early trading for Glencore.
And we were mentioning about UBI Banca earlier, and just to say it's jumped as much as 23% after Intesa's bid. So a lot of movement going on there. Joe, thanks very much indeed. Joe Easton there with stocks to watch this morning.
Sticking with earnings and back to the HSBC story, it announced it's set to slash about 15% of its workforce. The lender is also suspending buybacks for this year and next. That's as it works to restructure its business and cut costs. It's hoping for $4.5 billion of savings. Speaking exclusively to Bloomberg earlier, HSBC CFO Ewan Stevenson also spoke about the challenges the bank is facing with the coronavirus.
We're continuing to actively monitor the impact of the coronavirus. I do think we're going to have to take some additional provisions this quarter as a result of that, but very much a call on how long does the virus continue for.
HSBC earns the bulk of its profits in Asia. The London-based lender also says the process of appointing a new CEO is still ongoing. It expects to make the announcement in the next 6 to 12 months.
Now, and back to the impact of the virus. The outbreak's hitting, of course, one of the world's most valuable companies. As we mentioned, Apple doesn't expect to meet its revenue guidance for this quarter. Manufacturing in China is ramping up more slowly than expected after the Lunar New Year holiday. Demand is also lower. Stores in China have been closed or operating on reduced hours.
And we're definitely seeing the impact across chip stocks in Europe. Some of the worst performing stocks on the Stock 600 right now. HSBC is one of them. We've heard that story. That's down almost 4%. But Dialog Semiconductor down 4.4%. And we've also got AMS trading lower by 3.5%. ST Micro also in the red, down 3%.
Now, BHP is warning raw material demand is going to take a hit on lower Chinese growth. That's if the fallout from the coronavirus outbreak extends beyond the end of next month. For now, it's holding up. BHP CEO Mike Henry spoke to Bloomberg earlier.
Demand's holding up. We're shipping all of our product. Prices have held up in part because of other supply-side disruptions. And we haven't seen any issues with receiving payments. Now, as long as things are contained within this quarter, we think they'll hold up through the remainder of the financial year. If not, then we'd have to revise our forecasts. But so far, we remain reasonably confident about the outlook for the remainder of the half calendar year.
BHP CEO Mike Henry, the world's biggest miner, posted positive results for the first half. Earnings surged 29% on higher iron ore prices.
And the shares down just a little bit more than 1% in London trading. Now, turning to the post-Brexit negotiations, the UK has launched an unprecedented attack on the EU's conditions for a trade deal. The UK's chief negotiator, David Frost, warning the bloc's demand that Britain be bound by its rules risks undermining democracy. It highlights the gulf between the two sides ahead of formal negotiations next month. And we did see the pound trade weaker in yesterday's session, trading at 129.81 right now, down another 0.2%.
Okay, for the latest in global news, here's Bloomberg's Sandra Kilhoff. Sandra, you're beginning with a warning about Huawei.
Yes, good morning, Roger. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has stepped up concerns over Huawei. She says the Chinese telecoms giant must be prevented from controlling the next generation of wireless networks, arguing that autocracy in China makes Huawei a threat to Western countries.
I do believe that if we were to let Huawei have the information highway dominance, it would be like putting the state police in the pocket of every person who uses that highway.
Mark Zuckerberg has told EU regulators that he would be happy to work with them if it means winning back the trust of Facebook users. Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo reports.
Mark Zuckerberg, after 2 very difficult years for the company, conceded there are areas in which social media companies such as Facebook and EU governments could work together, and said he would also welcome more guidance if that means improving the user experience. In Brussels, Maria Tadeo, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And the contest to lead Angela Merkel's CDU party kicks off in Berlin today. Bloomberg's Chris Reiter has the latest on German politics.
Friedrich Merz, the longtime Merkel antagonist, will be first to make his case. Later in the week, fellow contenders, Armin Laschet and Jens Spahn, are due to follow. Meanwhile, we're in the final stages of campaigning for elections in Hamburg on Sunday. It will be the first sign of political fallout in Germany since the shock cooperation between the CDU and the far-right AfD in the eastern German state of Thuringia. In Berlin, Chris Reiter, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Sandra, thank you so much. Still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Apple says it's unlikely to hit quarterly revenue targets as the coronavirus weighs on production and demand. We're live from Beijing. Tim Cook outlines a slower return to normal in a memo to staff. This is Bloomberg.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Hello, I'm here to tell you that age really does bring wisdom, and you may still have plenty to contribute. At Eisner Amper, we're successful at helping business owners and entrepreneurs assess and plan for the future, as well as maximize where you are in the present. If you're curious about how to plan for both your professional and personal future, come and talk to us. I'm Lisa Stewart, principal in charge of the Center for Family Business Excellence, and I'd love to help you to find the right path forward. You can find us at eisneramper.com/family.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
Now, as the coronavirus outbreak ripples through Asia's economies, FX markets are not immune to its effects. Let's take a look at how the deadly virus is impacting currencies. Now with Pepperstone Group Head of Research, Chris Weston. Chris, great to have you with us. Now, we are continuing to see these downgrades on growth forecasts and export forecasts. So even if we did see a bit of a bump in Asia FX, how likely is that to be sustained?
Well, look, I think we could see some high volatility, but I think Apple's numbers today have got us the growth situation on far more on the watch list now. And I think to get that high volatility and that sustained sell-off, what we now need to see is the data really start to meander lower. And obviously that starts this week with the Korean export numbers. And then what we need to see is a disconnect between weakening actual data and central banks not coming to the party. And I think that's where the markets will start seeing higher volatility. If we see the data rolling over, but central banks don't necessarily follow suit, I think the market could see some high volatility, and that will resonate in FX as well.
Which are the currencies that are most vulnerable to what's happening in Asia right now?
Well, I mean, everyone's been focused on the Singapore dollar. You talk about the Thai baht on the tourist side of things, and people are being fairly reluctant to buy into those of late.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now over to First Word Breaking News Desk in Berlin for today's morning call. Here's Richard Jones. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Roger. It was a down day across most Asia equity markets today, with news that Apple is unlikely to meet its quarterly revenue target weighing on stocks across the region. The CSI 300 closed lower by 0.5%. The Nikkei 225 was down by 1.4%. The Hang Seng down 1.5%, as was the Kospi. The E-mini S&P and E-mini Nasdaq futures are also both trading lower, down by 0.3 and 0.7%, respectively. Most European equities have also opened lower this morning, with the Euro Stoxx 50, the DAX, the CAC 40 and FTSE 100 all trading down by 3 to 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB is bucking the downtrend in Europe this morning, trading up 0.9%, with financials leading the way, driven by takeover news in the banking sector. Turning to the bond markets, the U.S. 10-year yield is 4 basis points lower at 1.55%, with the 10-year German Bund yield 3 basis points lower at minus 0.43%. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is trading little changed, with the Japanese yen and Swiss franc leading gains in the G10 space, both inching higher on broadly softer risk sentiment. In terms of European economic data this morning, UK jobs readings for December are released, as is Sweden unemployment data for January, with the German ZEW reading for February also on the docket. In terms of central bank speakers, we get the ECB's Panetta and the Riksbank's Ingves speaking today, both in the European afternoon. That's it from me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg terminal. Roger?
Thanks, Richard. Now, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Sandra Kiloff with more on what's going on around the world. Sandra.
Good morning, Roger. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has called the coronavirus an emergency for the country's economy. Announcing extraordinary steps to minimize its impact, Moon warned that the virus could be bigger and longer lasting than a 2015 epidemic that killed 38 people. Back then, the central bank responded with a rate cut and the government enacted an 11.6 trillion won extra budget. The head of EU foreign policy policy is warning that despite ceasefire agreements in Libya, fighting is still taking place. Joseph Borrell also said the truce and arms embargo are being violated. He estimated that the cut in oil exports from Libya have also weakened its economy, costing around $60 million a day in lost oil revenues. And it's getting too hot to ski in Norway. Last month was the country's warmest January on record, forcing winter sports enthusiasts to turn to indoor skiing. That's why the Snø Resort opened its doors just outside Oslo, allowing snowboarders and skiers to practice their tricks despite outside temperatures rising to 25 degrees Celsius warmer than usual. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Sandra, thank you so much. I've never been skiing. I have been looking to do a yoga retreat in Norway, though.
In either. I know, beach volleyball is what we've got to introduce in Norway. That's the new one. Surfing, beach volleyball is perfect. For your climate.
Well, the skiing is actually very good in Norway. I've gone quite a few times, actually. But this has just been the worst season for them. And it's been really bad in the Alps as well. France, Switzerland, Austria, all of them complaining that there just hasn't been enough snow. So not looking great for those ski resorts, unfortunately. Global warming, guys.
Yeah, thank you for the world news, Sandra Kilhoff, with the global news. Now, the virus outbreak is having an impact on one of the world's most valuable companies. Apple doesn't expect to meet revenue guidance for the March quarter. It says demand for iPhones has been reduced in China because stores have been closed or are operating with reduced hours. And Chinese factories that assemble the device are ramping up production more slowly than expected. For more on this, Bloomberg's China correspondent Selena Wang is in Beijing. Selena, great to have you with us. It's really a double whammy for Apple here, being hit both on the demand and the supply side, and really highlights the risks of such a big exposure to China.
Yeah, Naira, that's exactly right. I mean, even though its manufacturing partner sites are outside of the center of the outbreak and have restarted, we're seeing from Apple and other multinationals that the process of restarting these factories is really slow. You have millions of factory workers that have struggled to return to their place of work with these travel restrictions and quarantines. And then on top of that, you mentioned that demand side impact. There's been a significant reduction there because stores in China have been closed or operating with reduced hours and few customers. There's actually an Apple store not too far from where I live that had been closed up until recently, but now that even though it's open, I've noticed there's very little foot traffic there. And this does, of course, have a big impact on Apple since China is its third largest market. It has about 42 stores there, which have been closed for much of February. And you're seeing this, again, not just with Apple, but many companies across China. According to a survey by the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, 80% of U.S. manufacturers around Shanghai said they don't have enough staff to run at full speed.
And of course, Selena, I mean, we're talking about the supply side being the cause of this, and there must be a lot of Apple suppliers, people who make the chips or whatever it is, must be in a very difficult position as well. The consequences are huge, aren't they?
Right. Well, this news from Apple isn't too surprising given the reporting we have been doing on the supply chain disruptions. In fact, just earlier this month, Foxconn, which makes the majority of the world's iPhones, one of Apple's biggest partners, warned investors of the challenges that it's been facing trying to get enough workers despite the widespread transport blockades. They've had to quarantine many people, and they've also been trying to avoid this nightmare scenario of a potential on-campus epidemic that could shut down production altogether. So these factories and partners of Apple, they need to make sure they're abiding by local regulations and that they're implementing all the necessary precautions to prevent any potential outbreak, and need to ensure that they have enough sanitization gear and they have enough masks. So a lot of challenges to getting back up and running.
Selena, do we have any sense on whether this is going to be a short or a long-term impact on Apple? Because the low-cost iPhone plans, according to our reporting, are said to remain on track for the March launch.
Well, it's really hard to say, and the company also is confident that in other areas outside of China, targets are still on track as usual. Some economists have pointed out that if this is mainly a supply chain issue and they're able to make up for the lost production, then the issues shouldn't be too large. But if you are going to see a sustained hit on the demand side as well that could have a really big impact on Apple if people continue for many months into the future to go out less, to shop less, to purchase and consume less. And again, this isn't only impacting Apple. Nintendo said it's having issues producing its Switch gaming devices. Facebook has said that it will see production of its Oculus VR headsets drop because of the virus as well. And this all just highlights just how important China is to the global supply chain, and especially to the tech industry. Pretty much every major piece of consumer electronics is now made in China.
So,
Selena Wang in Beijing, our Bloomberg China correspondent. Thank you so much. On that point that Selena was making, though, Roger, Apple's actually the only major US tech giant to offer the majority of its products and services in China. Products from Facebook, Alphabet, Google, Amazon and Netflix are either limited or unavailable. So among the FANGs, at least, Apple is one of the most exposed.
And therefore the most vulnerable to what's going on. And perhaps the others will be thinking, well, perhaps the restrictions weren't quite as much of an imposition as they initially thought. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Apple is warning it won't meet its revenue target for this quarter, and it's blaming work slowdowns and lower demand because of the coronavirus. Pier 1 Imports is seeking bankruptcy protection. The retailer hopes that it will facilitate a sale. It's in talks with multiple buyers. Pier 1 reiterating plans to lay off staff and close hundreds of stores. Did you eat out less over the holidays? Well, Conagra is cutting its sales forecast. The packaged food maker citing a holiday slowdown at restaurants along with retail weakness in January. And we saw a big drop in sales of clothes in January, the biggest one-month drop according to the Commerce Department since 2009. That could spell trouble for the world's biggest retailer. Walmart also sells more apparel than any other retailer in the U.S. Stocks hovering around record highs after logging a win last week. The coronavirus, of course, front and center today, along with China's pledges to support its economy. I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Witham offers an elite team of seasoned specialists providing world-class advisory, audit, and tax solutions to the financial services industry.
Hi, I'm Tom Angel, partner and practice leader of Witham's Financial Services Group. Witham is a nationally recognized advisory and accounting firm serving private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, broker-dealers, 40 Act funds, and SPACs. We provide customized support to our clients, especially emerging managers. Our deep experience and expertise makes Witham the firm of choice in the financial service industry.
Visit Witham.com to contact a member of Witham's Financial Services team.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL Scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Let's get this right, sir. You didn't see three men dressed as clowns take off in a van with a Renaissance painting because you were distracted by, and I quote, a sporty red compact SUV with a bold mesh grille, a sculpted bonnet with sweeping roofline on diamond-cut alloys.
And beautiful rear haunches.
So, you saw a Jaguar E-Pace. But what about the clowns?
What clowns?
Jaguar E-Pace, designed to steal attention. Search Jaguar E-Pace.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
I read Stan. Will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, and try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn.
First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Despite never having used them, Alison Peartree was not initially a fan of purple bricks.
Because I heard from my uncle's cousin's neighbour's dog walker they don't have proper estate agents.
But Alison's uncle's cousin's neighbour's dog walker was wrong. Purple Bricks have experienced local agents ready to sell your home.
Turns out Martin from Purple Bricks was very knowledgeable. And he didn't charge commission. I've even recommended him to my sister's boyfriend's auntie's hairdresser, Sharon.
Purple Bricks. Book your free valuation today.
Fixed fee payable on instruction or after 10 months. Viewing service cost extra.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Naira Chehich.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And 30 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe, European equities follow Asian stocks lower, down 0.6% on the Stock 600. In terms of some of the biggest movers, a lot of the chip stocks taking a hit because sentiment has been hit generally across assets today by Apple coming out and saying that it may not be able to meet its revenue guidance for this quarter. It's being hit on both the supply and demand side because of coronavirus. So chip makers like Dialog Semiconductor have been taking quite a hit. That's down 4.5%. Also HSBC, one of the worst performers, down 4.5% after announcing a revamp, including cost cuts, but also a suspension of the buyback. In terms of regional equity benchmarks, you're looking at the FTSE 100 lower by 0.7%, the CAC 40 lower by 0.6%, the DAX trades lower by 0.7%. The IBEX is flat, the FTSE MIB edges into the green. US stock markets were closed yesterday. Futures point to a lower open. Dow and S&P futures down about 0.5%, but Nasdaq futures leading the losses, down almost 0.9%. The risk-off tone is clear in bond markets too. The 10-year Treasury yield down almost 5 basis points to a 1.54 handle. The 30-year yield on a 1.98 handle, down 5 basis points right now. Also, the 10-year Bund yield lower by 2.5 basis points, negative 43. The 10-year gilt yield slips as well. In FX, you're seeing the yen bid. You're seeing commodity currencies come under pressure. And looking at commodities, oil and Brent, WTI and Brent both down more than 1%. WTI at 51.38, Brent at 56.81. Copper retreats and gold moves higher.
Well, let's move on to some of today's top stories. Now, HSBC set to slash about 15% of its workforce. The lender is taking over $7 billion of charges and suspending buybacks, and that's as part of a restructuring. It plans to exit some businesses and cut costs. HSBC is also still hunting for a permanent chief executive. We spoke to the lender's CFO about the coronavirus outbreak.
We're continuing to actively monitor the impact of the coronavirus. I do think we're going to have to take some additional provisions this quarter as a result of that, but very much a call on how long does the virus continue for.
And that was the HSBC CFO Ewan Stevenson speaking exclusively to Bloomberg.
And the coronavirus outbreak is hitting one of the world's most valuable companies. Apple doesn't expect to meet its revenue guidance for this quarter. Manufacturing in China is ramping up more slowly than expected after the Lunar New Year holiday. Demand is also lower. Stores in China have been closed or operating on reduced hours.
Meanwhile, the British government says it's going to evacuate its citizens from the stricken cruise liner, the Diamond Princess. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
China reported 1,886 new coronavirus cases and 98 more deaths. Britain, the latest to evacuate nationals from the cruise liner, following Japan, the U.S., Australia, and South Korea. The boat remains docked in Yokohama. The Toronto Star says 32 Canadian citizens on board have tested positive for the virus. In the meantime, the Hong Kong government is seeking $3.6 billion in spending on virus control. And in neighboring Macau, casinos now look set to reopen on Thursday after being shut for 15 days. That's a sign that some parts of life are getting back to normal. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And Intesa Sanpaolo has launched a surprise €4.9 billion bid for rival UBI banker. It's a sign that a long-awaited consolidation among Italian banks may be starting. Intesa says it expects to finalise the transaction by the end of 2020. The deal would boost its earnings per share by 6% from 2019 levels. Local media reports that UBI banker considers it a hostile bid, but UBI banker shares have risen the most on record, as much as 29%, right now up 25%.
Now let's get the latest in global news. Here's Bloomberg's Sandra Kilhoff. And Sandra, you're beginning with a major about-face for Facebook CEO.
Yes, good morning, Roger. Mark Zuckerberg has asked the EU to impose new internet rules. Bloomberg's Natalia Drozdiak says the Facebook boss thinks it will be good for business.
On his trip, Zuckerberg reiterated calls for internet regulation, including around harmful content. He said regulations would help users maintain trust in the internet. The call comes as the EU has already started preparing new rules on platforms and tech firms. In Brussels, Natalia Drozdiak, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has stepped up U.S. warnings about Huawei. She says the Chinese telecoms giant must be prevented from controlling the next generation of wireless networks.
There's some economic threats by the Chinese to companies. If you don't take Huawei as your country, we won't be doing these deals. But that's totally unacceptable. For the benefit of a few corporations, you cannot sell the privacy of the people of your country down the river.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Addis Ababa for his first official tour of Africa. Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams says it includes stops in Senegal and Angola.
The meetings are meant to show support for what the U.S. calls dynamic leadership on the continent. The U.S. is also seeking new business and economic partnerships as it pushes back against China's increasingly assertive push of its own for economic dominance in countries across Africa. In Addis Ababa, Nick Wadhams, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has committed at least $10 billion to fight climate change. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports.
On an Instagram post, he says it's going to take collective action from big companies, small companies, nation states, global organizations, and individuals. We can save Earth. He's been under pressure from employees for practices they say will injure the Earth long term, things like packaging. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Sandra, thank you so much. I feel like we've heard a lot about various things Bezos is spending on recently.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, he is one of the world's richest people. Yeah. What is interesting about this is just that Amazon last year said it was going to try and reach 80% renewable energy use by 2024. So this is part of that promise as well.
Let's turn to a Bloomberg exclusive now. Thank you, Sandra Kilhoff, with the World News. HSBC is to slash about 15% of its workforce and take $7.3 billion in charges. That's as Europe's biggest bank targets cost cuts of $4.5 billion as it faces up to challenges, including the coronavirus and protests in Hong Kong. Earlier, Manus Cranny and I discussed the bank's plans with HSBC's Chief Financial Officer, Ewan Stevenson.
We are shrinking in areas where we think that we have clear underperformance and a lack of long-term sustainable competitive advantage. Equally, in today's plan, what you see is significant investment in those parts of the business where we do think we have competitive advantage and we can grow. So I think we're absolutely doing both of those things.
Yeah, it definitely was an interesting comment from one of the shareholders and sort of laid the options for HSBC, Ewan, as fairly binary. What you're saying is that you're kind of balancing those two sides of the coin. Are you happy that you're getting the balance right from those two binary options?
We think this is the right thing for the bank to do, the right plan for now. We are looking to invest $100 billion of risk-weighted assets, around $14 to $15 billion of capital in the next 3 years in parts of the business that are performing well, particularly Asia. So we do think this is the right balance. It's coupled with a very substantive cost reduction program, coupled with organizational simplification to allow us to speed up the pace of execution. We think it's a great plan.
You just pick up on the risk-weighted assets. I could say to you probably you're at that moment of leaning into not bad asset price markets and a hunger for yield. The risk-weighted assets you're going to sell, just a little bit more complexion on them before we go.
Unsurprisingly, it's in parts of the business, the markets business in global banking and markets, I think we are intending to exit a lot of domestically focused customers in Europe and the US on the global banking side. And we're also going to exit international customers that are not producing acceptable returns today. So I think we're going to be quite surgical and ruthless in terms of targeting those parts of the business where we're not generating acceptable returns. We're going to take those risk-weighted assets and reinvest them in parts of the business where we can see much better returns.
Yeah, just very finally, Ewan, on the US business, just characterise for us what that's going to look like. We know the numbers, but what exactly are you trying to achieve?
Look, two things. I think on the retail side, we're getting back to where we think we have core competitive advantages in servicing the diaspora population in the US and international customers. So what you see is a 30% reduction in the branch network, predominantly focused on the East Coast and building branch presence on the West Coast. And secondly, on the global market side, reducing our presence in the US quite materially and looking to concentrate more of that business into London.
That was HSBC CFO Ewan Stevenson speaking exclusively to Bloomberg. And the share price reaction, Roger, we're down more than 5% for HSBC shares right now, dropping the most in 3 years. So the strategy, the messaging hasn't necessarily been received that well. What we were talking about at the top of the show is that maybe a lot of the cost cutting was already priced in. And of course, the suspension of the buyback from 2020 to 21 probably not going down that well either.
Okay, well, we're only speaking to people called Stevenson this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe because we've got Tom Stevenson next, Investment Director of Fidelity, joining us. No relation as far as I know. We'll get his take on the economic impact of coronavirus as Korea and the RBA both warn of a hit to the economy. The impact of the virus, of course, still very much in doubt just because we don't frankly know the scale of it. And that is still unclear as the World Health Organization has been making clear. The figures coming out of China seem, well, vague. This is Bloomberg.
You know your body, and you know when something's off, when something doesn't feel quite right. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, rashes, and fever. They could be signs of lupus. Listen to your body. Take care of yourself. We're here to help you take control of your health. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Are you looking for senior care for your mom or dad but don't know where to start? Hi, I'm Joan London with The Place for Mom. Nobody knows your parent or loved one better than you, and nobody knows senior living better than the experts at A Place for Mom. It's a free service, and we've helped thousands of families find the right place for their mom or dad. There's a place for answers, A Place for Mom. Call today.
Call A Place for Mom at 1-800-391-1755. That's 1-800-391-1755.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Can I have chemo at home?
It's only suitable for a couple of types of cancer.
When you search one question about cancer, you end up with millions of results which contradict each other. For clear and uncomplicated information, come to Cancer Research UK. Visit us online or give us a call on 0808 800 40 40. Cancer Research UK. Together, we will beat cancer.
The Grand DFS sale featuring Wallace.
Hello.
And Gromit.
Well, say hello, lad.
Every sofa is made to order.
By a speedy Sofa-matic machine.
By hand.
Oh, suit yourself.
So you can have your sofa exactly how you want it.
Made of cheese?
Not that exactly.
Oh, probably a good thing, eh, Gromit? It'd be gone in a jiffy.
The Grand DFS sale is now on.
How about a cushion made of cheese? Or a footstool?
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got off at the next stop.
You're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of March 2020. £3,311.25p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
Good morning, this is your Southern service to London Victoria. Join in our onboard quiz. Here's our next clue. What C sounds like a handheld party food but keeps you dry and protected from the rain? Not canapes, canopies.
At Southern Railway, we're investing over £7 million into making improvements for you, like canopies, cycle parking and new platform lighting across more of our stations. Find out more and book your tickets at southernrailway.com. Southern Railway. We're with you.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow and TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn. The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. And stocks have been falling in Europe following what had been a very risk-off session in Asia, and US equity index futures also dropping. All seems to be based on Apple saying their quarterly sales would miss forecasts, and that rather spooked investors who'd hoped for a rather limited economic impact from the coronavirus in China. We're definitely seeing the results of that. Stock 600 down 0.5%, FTSE 100 down 0.3%, CAC down 0.5%, DAX down 0.6%. In fact, the only outlier at the moment is FTSE MIB, which is up almost 0.2%, perhaps reflecting that news that we carried earlier about Intesa Sao launching a surprise bid for the rival UBI banker. We're certainly seeing a kind of risk-on sentiment vaguely there. Looking ahead to the US futures, S&P E-minis down 0.4%, Dow down 0.5%, Nasdaq down 0.9%, reflecting very much the tech issue in relation to the current gloom in markets. And interestingly, looking at the shares of those companies that are major suppliers, of course, to Apple, Infineon down currently 2.6%, and we're also seeing Dialogue semis also down 5% at the moment, their shares price. Looking to oil, WTI 51.35 is where we find the oil price 1.34% down. Brent crude down 1.6%, 56.74. 10-year Treasuries 1.5 is the handle. That's down 4 basis points. And also keeping an eye on cable because of the remarks made by the new British Brexit negotiator in Brussels that certainly suggested tough negotiations ahead. Cable 1.29 is where we find that. Right, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Sandra Kilhoff with more on what's going on around the world.
Good morning, Roger. Swarms of desert locusts are spreading through East Africa, destroying crops and pastures. The UN is calling it the worst outbreak in recent memory and warning of an unprecedented threat to food security. And the situation will probably get worse if this year's wild weather continues as locust swarms grow in an increased number of cyclones. The travel ban to Hong Kong has left thousands of Philippine migrant workers stranded. The so-called helpers are critical to both economies, enabling hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers to work outside the home. And the money sent home to the Philippines contributes to more than $30 billion in remittances that make up about 9% of the country's GDP. And Bill Gates has paid Tesla a compliment for coaxing the car industry to go electric. But if he was expecting kind words in return, he shouldn't have spoken about how much he loves his new Porsche Taycan. When a Tesla enthusiast posted about Gates' decision, Elon Musk replied, quote, "My conversations with Gates have been underwhelming, to be honest." Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
So what do we make of Elon Musk in this? I mean, it's not unlikely that he would say something like that, is it?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, this is not the first time he has kind of been a bit meh about what other billionaires are doing. He's lashed out previously at Jeff Bezos, calling him a copycat when they were talking about embarking on their internet satellite project. He's also not been too impressed with Jeff Bezos' climate moves either. So
we love it when billionaires fall out.
A bit of skepticism there.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about the impact of the coronavirus on the global economy, which we're seeing various things. Not least, of course, the news from Apple about not meeting their March estimate at the moment. Joining us here in the studio is Tom Stevenson, Investment Director at Fidelity. Tom, just take us inside what you think is the likely impact of the coronavirus, because many people are saying we don't know the figures. Even the WHO doesn't seem to have a full grasp on what's happening, so it must be almost impossible to predict the impact on the global economy and the Chinese economy.
I think it's very difficult to predict, and that's why we're seeing this volatility in the markets at the moment. Because as soon as anyone does say something, investors are latching onto it and extrapolating it maybe further than maybe they should, and that's clearly what we saw today with Apple's remarks. But I mean, I think what is clear is that the first quarter is going to be severely hit in China, and when China sneezes, the rest of Asia, I'm afraid, catches a cold. And we're seeing that with comments from the South Koreans in particular, obviously highly dependent on the Chinese economy. Singapore as well, with their budget today, spending heavily to compensate, and Japan, of course.
What will it take for the market, and perhaps we're seeing a little bit of wobble on this front today, but what will it take for the market to price something other than a V-shaped recovery? Because what really struck me with Apple was, yes, you had the demand side issue of fewer people going to stores, less footfall, but it was the supply chain risk that they mentioned as well. They're being hit from both sides, and that's what's so hard to quantify, and something that the market seems to be looking through at the moment.
Yes, and I think that's the real danger for the global economy. It's not so much the consumer spending aspect of this, so the travel companies, the hotels, for example. I mean, when people start spending, they start traveling again, those types of businesses will bounce back quite quickly. But I think it's the complex supply chains, things like the autos industry and, of course, technology, where we have complex cross-border supply chains. That's what's being disrupted, and I think that's where the uncertainty lies about the length, the duration, and the intensity of the impact.
And as you say, those supply chains are complex, but also many of them long-term. What about the commodities area? Because we know demand has gone down, obviously. And we're seeing results from some of the big commodities players, which don't necessarily reflect that because, of course, they're looking backwards. But do you get a sense that we're going to see a big problem? I mean, oil is the obvious one. On the Bloomberg this morning on M Live, suggestions that perhaps the oil market is actually being complacent about the impact so far.
Yes, I think the oil price is quite interesting. If you look back at what's happened over the last 2 months, we've had a couple of incidents that have had an impact on the oil price. So we had the events in Iraq with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, and you would have expected that to push the oil price higher, and it did, but fairly grudgingly actually. It just pushed slightly higher, just got up to $70. As soon as we had the coronavirus outbreak, the downward movement in the oil price was very significant, and what that's telling me is that the underlying momentum of the oil price is downwards, that it is an oversupplied market, and so I'm not surprised that we're now back down in the mid 50s, and I can't see what it would take really for that to reverse in the short term.
In that sense, a bond's looking very attractive at the moment. Yields keep falling. The 10-year Treasury yield down towards 154. The 30-year yield dropping below 2%. Is the place to be right now in bond markets, particularly at the long end?
Well, I think in a tactical, very short-term measure, then I would agree with that. I think, you know, and we've seen it today, the 30-year down below 2%, and pretty close to its all-time low. So I think there is downward momentum on bond yields in this flight to safety. But I think longer term, if we're right about the overall, the underlying health of the economy, and if you look at the sort of GDP forecasts, earnings forecasts going further out, then, you know, I think that actually I wouldn't want to be too heavily exposed to that market.
And what about some of the aspects around the rest of the world that come from the virus? Because interestingly, Europe is very interesting in this, not least obviously Germany, very tied in manufacturing terms to what's going on in China. And we get the ZEW survey, of course, coming out in terms of sentiment later today. European equities have, not today, but been trading at record highs. JP Morgan seems to say the rally can go on, even expand market's been left behind. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I think I'm not surprised that markets have rallied. I think I think there are a couple of things going on here. One, I think, is the expectation that we will get more stimulus from the Chinese in particular, but also from other. I mean, we've had the South Koreans today talking about injecting money into support measures. So I think that obviously helps Europe because it is an export-focused economy, and it is highly dependent on whether we do get that stimulus. I think also in Europe, there is a sense that we will get more government spending, more fiscal stimulus in Europe, and I think the combination of the two is what's pushed. And also the third element, of course, is that valuations have been really very undemanding in Europe. So you get that combination of the three things. I'm not surprised at where we've got to.
Tom, you said that tactically you might want to be in long bonds right now, but it's not necessarily somewhere you want to be longer term. So where do you want to be? Is it in equities? And if so, why? If there is concern that earnings might come under pressure, particularly from the supply chain disruptions that we were talking about with coronavirus and the way that corporates might have to integrate that into their planning and the hit that they could potentially take to profits, is it in equities and is it just based on multiple expansion like last year because central banks are going to step in and be the backstop again?
Well, it is partly that. I think that we will get more stimulus. I think central banks will provide the backstop. But if you look at the underlying earnings that we've seen over the last quarter, so if you look at the earnings that we've seen just before the outbreak of the coronavirus, then I think what we were looking at is a modest growth in earnings after a period last year of no growth or negative growth in earnings. That's expected to continue through this year. So I think the recession has been postponed. I don't think we're going to see anything like that until 2021. And so I think the underlying outlook is not bad for equities.
Well, Tom, thanks very much indeed. Tom Stevenson there, Investment Director at Fidelity. And coming up in the next hour of Daybreak Europe, Matt Miller takes over. He'll be speaking with William Hobbs, Chief Investment Officer at Barclays Wealth and Investments.
And we continue to see equities move lower in Europe. The Stock 600 down 0.4%, almost an hour into the open. US futures on the back foot as well. This is Bloomberg.
In the world of...
It was a Sunday morning when I jumped on the tube.
And decided to pop down to Greenwich via...
a large indoor jungle.
And when I got there, I was captivated by a sparkling...
scary dinosaur just standing there right in front of me.
So off we went to Wembley Park.
To look at the colourful fish.
Tap into the wonderful world of Off-Peak London. Travel in zones 2 to 6 for £1.50. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. £1.50 is an adult off-peak pay-as-you-go fare for a journey not going via Zone 1 on Tube, DLR and most London Overground services. Always touch in and out with the same card or device to pay the right fare.
Switch to Sky Broadband Superfast. It's so reliable, we'll guarantee your speed or money back. It's £27 a month for 18 months with a £19.95 setup fee. So stay connected with reliable Sky Broadband Superfast. Switch or recontract today. Search sky.com. Prices may change during this period. Includes Sky Pay As You Talk, Sky Fibre areas, speeds vary by location. If speed drops below minimum download speed for 3 consecutive days, we'll refund 1 month subscription. Claim twice in minimum term after first 14 days. See sky.com/guarantee.
Are you sitting comfortably? Is your roof cascading light in the space around you? Loving that feeling as you glide over a bumpy road? If you are, you're most certainly experiencing the advanced comfort of a Citroën SUV. If you're not, take one for a comfort drive. A test drive, but way more comfortable. Citroën C3 Aircross and C5 Aircross SUV range. Now with £500 off list price and 3 year 0% APR finance. Ooh la la! Citroën. Citroën UK Limited, acting as a credit broker, not a lender. Conditional sale. Terms, eligibility criteria and conditions apply. Guarantee may be required. PSA Finance UK Limited, participating dealer stock vehicles ordered between the 3rd and the 29th of February and registered by 31st of March.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
External pressure is going to be an opportunity for reform in China. I think liquidity more generally across financial markets is an issue and a concern.
The Spanish banks in particular are in a much better place than they were 5 years ago.
It wouldn't be great to have a drawn-out trade conflict with the US or indeed with anybody else.
I've never been one to prophesy where sterling will be, and you're a madman if you think you can.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, live from the City of London. I'm Matt Miller. Anna Edwards is out this week, so I've come to the big smoke to cover the markets for you. We check the data every 15 minutes, and today we have equity indexes that are down across the board after Apple cut its revenue target for the quarter. And concerns about the coronavirus abound. We also had a big news from HSBC, which we're going to get to in a big way in just a moment. 35,000 jobs could go. You do have one equity index rising, and that is on bank news. The FTSE MIB in Milan is up as Ubi Banca gets an offer, unsolicited offer from Intesa Sanpaolo. As a result, that is the one equity index that's gaining across Europe. But the DAX is down 2/3%, and the FTSE... Actually, the FTSE is only down about 0.2% right now, so the FTSE has recovered substantially from the more than 0.5% drop that we saw at the open. In terms of other data points, one I find really interesting is the 30-year yield, U.S. 30-year yield dropping below 2%. I believe it fell to about 1.98%. I'm looking on my WB screen right now. Yeah, 1.988 is the level. 1.95, if it closed at that level, would be the lowest that it's ever been in history. Intraday, I think it's 1.90. But anyway, we're down there. So investors are buying long bonds, and they're also buying treasuries. The yield on the 10-year is 1.544%. You can get still almost 110 yen for your dollar, so not a lot of strength in the Japanese currency, and gold costs 1588.06 for a troy ounce. Quick look at the euro, down at 108.26, a pound just under 130 at 129.77, and a barrel of Brent crude costs $56.60. So there's a wrap up of your data. Now I want to get to the top story, certainly here in Europe, that I was talking about, alluding to earlier. HSBC is planning a major restructuring that will lead to maybe 35,000 job cuts, according to the CEO in an interview with Bloomberg. If the British bank's latest attempt to revive its fortunes since the financial crisis is to work, he may keep his job. That's another thing we'll talk about. Could Quinn remain as CEO? Right now, still just the interim CEO. HSBC is going to take a $7.3 billion charge, or $7.3 billion in charges, and its retail network is going to be scaled back by about a third. So there's going to be real operational changes made here. Let's bring in our finance reporter, Harry Wilson. He's been here since 3 o'clock in the morning, breaking the earnings, and Bloomberg opinion columnist Marcus Ashworth. Slept in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Marcus Ashworth is here as well. Harry, let me first come to you because you were telling us yesterday that we could see a major restructuring and that we could also hear more about Noel Quinn's job longer term. On the first part, he said maybe they'll cut 35,000 jobs.
Yeah, so, I mean, they obviously couch this a little bit. They have 25,000 a year in attrition. So they could, if they just stopped hiring people and just let people walk out the door, get to that number pretty quickly. But in truth, that's not what's actually going to happen. And obviously, it's going to be pretty focused on a certain number of regions. So you're really looking here at Europe and the US, and in particular looking at the investment bank, where a lot of these cuts are going to come. And I think also, obviously, quite a bit of this could come through some asset disposals. They haven't given any updates on it today, but we obviously know that the French retail bank is on the block, and then you've also got chatter about Turkey, Oman, and several other countries which could also be cut. So it's not hard to see how they get to that 35,000 job cut number.
It's Europe's biggest bank, but its big business, big exposure is in Asia, right? I mean, this is a bank that just hasn't been able to do very much with its size and scale over the last decade.
Well, its investment banking capabilities have always had a big question mark over it. It's never really been deemed as a efficient and aggressive enough institution. And evidently, negative rates in Europe and what's going on in the UK as far as the development of banking is makes it much less of a UK bank. It's doubling down on its Asia presence. That's where it makes all its money. 90% of its profits have traditionally always come from Hong Kong. That's in a difficult state at the moment, but I think it will win friends and influence people in China in particular if it makes it the emphasis that's shifting more to Asia. It's quite a gamble in theory with regards to what happens as far as China's economy and Hong Kong in particular. But nonetheless, it's telling you that it's too tough for the scale of its risk-weighted assets and its capital it has in Europe, that it can make, it believes, better money in a less competitive, more monopolistic market share that it has in Asia.
It does have issues to deal with. Obviously, Hong Kong is a huge question mark, Harry. Even longer term, that's a big question mark. Coronavirus, I mean, that could start getting better. That could be just a Q1 issue. But the Hong Kong protests look like it's going to be much more than that. What kind of uncertainty does it face in that region?
There's a number of uncertainties. You've obviously named two of the big ones there. You have the US-China trade standoff. And then on top of that, in Hong Kong, you have a longer-term issue around two countries, one system. You know, we're halfway now through that. Clear what HSBC's business will look like at the end of that, when Hong Kong potentially becomes just another Chinese city, not a special region as it is now. So I think there's a lot of questions there that they're looking at, and I guess obviously this focus on Asia. You know, on the one hand, this should be the great sort of propellant of the share price, right? I mean, they have this fantastic exposure to Asia, and Asia is the fastest growing region. One of the fastest growing regions in the world. So they should be printing money. The fact is they obviously have these laggard regions in Europe and the US which they need to sort out. But obviously as you now double down on Asia, you become an ever more concentrated bet on that. And historically, HSBC's big game was to actually try and diversify itself away from Asia. You know, previous CEOs, chairmen had looked to make HSBC a more global bank. You know, the acquisition in the early 90s of the Midland Bank, all of this was meant to actually lessen their exposure to Hong Kong, and now what you seem to see is actually they're really kind of returning home again.
And it's not just the regions that, I mean, Marcus, you mentioned the investment bank. I was looking on the league tables over the last 12 months. They're 16th. I mean, they're behind Rothschild and Deutsche Bank. Why isn't it better?
Well, it never has been. I mean, when they took over James Capel, they never could ever integrate that properly. Look, HSBC has always been the home of Scottish bank clerks in the context of they haven't really taken the investment banking model to heart. I think they've been run by a Samir Asaf and a bunch of French Lebanese culture from the Credit Kershwell to France business for many years in London. That's been their sort of heart. That model is going to change. They're pulling out of G10 derivatives, which is a huge move for a bank of HSBC's size, and it tells you that they just think, regardless of this big spread globally, that model isn't working for them. The big supermarket model, they are going to focus on where they think they can get a better return on capital because they need to, because they've underperformed for so long.
Harry Nolquin, does he stay longer, or is he still just the interim CEO?
Well, HSBC would hate to be having this strategy judged by the market, but the 5% drop in the share price this morning in London tells you that investors aren't really buying this at the moment. Now, obviously, this is just a short-term effect. HSBC would say, well, look, this is a very complex plan. It's going to take the market a while, investors a while to work out exactly what all this means. But on the initial evidence, no, his chance of getting the job doesn't look great today. On the other hand, he is the only internal candidate for the job, so he does have a good chance in that sense. And this is a bank, remember, which has never actually appointed an external CEO. So you would normally say that this should be his job, should be a given. But when you've had the experience they've had last year of having to get rid of their inside man in the guise of John Flint, who was unceremoniously dumped after 18 months in the job, it looks unlikely that they might take that chance again. So I'd have to say the odds now on a external appointment do look to be rising.
All right, Harry, thanks so much for joining us. Harry Wilson, our finance reporter covering HSBC, and a Bloomberg opinion columnist, Marcus Ashworth. We will bring you our exclusive interview with the CFO, Ewan Stevenson, later this hour, so stay tuned for that. Now let's get the latest in global news. For that, we go to Sandra Kilhoff here in the studio. Sandra, you start with a story about Facebook's CEO.
Yes, good morning, Matt. Mark Zuckerberg has told EU regulators that he would be happy to work with them if it means winning back the trust of Facebook users. Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo reports.
Mark Zuckerberg, after 2 very difficult years for the company, conceded there are areas in which social media companies such as Facebook and EU governments could work together, and said he would also welcome more guidance if that means improving the user experience. In Brussels, Maria Tadeo, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has stepped up U.S. concerns over Huawei. She says the Chinese telecoms giant must be prevented from controlling the next generation of wireless networks, arguing that autocracy in China makes Huawei a threat to Western countries.
I do believe that if we were to let Huawei have the information highway dominance, it would be like putting the state police in the pocket of every person who uses that highway.
Turning to the post-Brexit negotiations, and the UK has launched an unprecedented attack on the EU's conditions for a trade deal. London's chief Brexit negotiator David Frost has warned the bloc's demand that Britain be bound by its rules risks undermining democracy. It highlights the gulf between the two sides ahead of formal negotiations next month. And the contest to lead Angela Merkel's CDU party kicks off in Berlin today. Bloomberg's Chris Reiter has the latest on German politics.
Friedrich Merz, the longtime Merkel antagonist, will be first to make his case. Later in the week, fellow contenders, Armin Laschet and Jens Spahn, are due to follow. Meanwhile, we're in the final stages of campaigning for elections in Hamburg on Sunday. It will be the first sign of political fallout in Germany since the shock cooperation between the CDU and the far-right AfD in the eastern German state of Thuringia. In Berlin, Chris Reiter, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Sandra, thanks very much. Now let's get your European sports report from Colin Besley. Colin?
Manchester United are now within 3 points of the Premier League's top 4. They got a 2-0 win at Chelsea, who currently occupy the final Champions League automatic qualification spot. United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer tells Sky Sports News the result gives them a chance, but there's plenty of work to do. Holders Liverpool continue their Champions League defence with a trip to Spain tonight. The runaway Premier League leaders face Atletico Madrid in the first leg of their last 16 tie. Jurgen Klopp's side are among the favourites to lift the trophy again, but they can expect a tough tough night. And Kyle Edmund returns to action this evening after winning his first ATP tennis title in 16 months at the weekend. The British number 3 follows victory in the New York Open with his first match in the Delray Beach Open against Hugo Humbert of France in Florida. Before that, Cameron Norrie faces American third seed Taylor Fritz in the opening round of the tournament.
Let's get your U.S. sports now with Pete Fox.
From the world of baseball, as spring training gets underway, odds makers William Hill think there will be repercussions to the Houston Astros for their sign-stealing cheating scandal, as they have set the over-under on the number of Astros to be hit by a pitch at 83.5. From the NHL scoreboard in San Jose, the Sharks fall to the Panthers, snapping a 2-game winning streak, 5-3 the final. Capitals got a pair of goals from TJ Oshie, but it wouldn't be enough as they fall one short to the Golden Knights, 3-2 the final at the T-Mobile Arena. And in Arizona, the Coyotes double up the Islanders by a score of 2-1. I'm Pete Fox. That's your Bloomberg NBC World Sports Update.
All right, Pete, thanks very much for that. Now, still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Apple shares are down more than 4% in the U.S. pre-market. That's as the iPhone maker announced it expects to miss its quarterly revenue goal because of the coronavirus. We're going to give you more on that top story. One of the most valuable companies in the world next. This is Bloomberg.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
More than just a game, baseball is big business. For the Atlanta Braves, this meant bringing $1 billion stadium project to life through a public-private partnership, creating the Battery, a mixed-use development that turned an underdeveloped area into a thriving community.
Always on the cutting edge of community development, Cohn Resnick advises industry participants on tax credits, affordable housing, opportunity zones, and more, helping communities reach their full potential. Explore more at cohnresnick.com/MLB. Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Transform your game.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council. Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
Now, as the coronavirus outbreak ripples through Asia's economies, FX markets are not immune to its effects. Let's take a look at how the deadly virus is impacting currencies. Now with Pepperstone Group Head of Research, Chris West. And Chris, great to have you with us. Now, we are continuing to see these downgrades on growth forecasts and export forecasts. So even if we did see a bit of a bump in Asia FX, how likely is that to be sustained?
Well, look, I think we could see some high volatility, but I think Apple's numbers today have got us the growth situation on far more on the watch list now. And I think to get that high volatility and that sustained sell-off, what we now need to see is the data really start to meander lower. And obviously that starts this week with the Korean export numbers. And then what we need to see is a disconnect between weakening actual data and central banks not coming to the party. And I think that's where the markets will start seeing higher volatility. If we see the data rolling over, but central banks don't necessarily follow suit, I think the market could see some high volatility, and that will resonate in FX as well.
Which are the currencies that are most vulnerable to what's happening in Asia right now?
Well, I mean, everyone's been focused on the Singapore dollar. You talk about the Thai baht on the tourist side of things, and people are being fairly reluctant to buy into those of late.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Danny Berger with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now, we're definitely looking at indexes in the red today, really across the globe. It seems to be the story that kicked it all off was Apple giving a warning that they weren't going to make their quarterly guidance on the coronavirus slowdown in demand and some of the supply issues they'd see from it as well. No better reflection of that than the NASDAQ down nearly 1% and Apple pre-market falling by more than 1%. Though I should say the NASDAQ is just trading at its lowest in 1 week. So yes, down almost 1%, but no huge losses here. Now, in terms of the stock 600, that's trading down by 0.6%. No doubt that some of the chip makers are adding to those losses. We're looking at stocks like Dialog Semi and ASML down. Basic resources, though, auto parts all losing more than technology in terms of groups. One of the only regional indexes to do better today is Italy. We're looking at some M&A there with Ubi Banca getting a surprise bid from Intesa Sanpaolo. So maybe that waking up the animal spirits who are hoping for some more M&A in the Italian finance sector. Now, looking into currencies, we're seeing a lot of the commodity currencies coming under pressure. Again, that might be some of the coronavirus impact. Also heard from the RBA today, but we're looking at the Kiwi dollar down about 0.6% versus the US dollar, Aussie dollar down 0.6%. Really the best performing currencies today, and really the only ones beating out the dollar are those haven assets, with the yen and the Swiss franc both gaining in today's session. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Sandra Keeloff with more on what's going on around the world.
Good morning, Danny. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has called the coronavirus an emergency for the country's economy, announcing extraordinary steps to minimize its impact. Moon warned that the virus could be bigger and longer lasting than a 2015 epidemic that killed 38 people. Back then, the central bank responded with a rate cut and the government enacted a 11.6 trillion won extra budget. The head of EU foreign policy is warning that despite ceasefire agreements in Libya, fighting is still taking place. Joseph Borrell also said the truce and arms embargo are being violated. He estimated that the cut in oil exports from Libya have also weakened its economy, costing around $60 million a day in lost oil revenues. And the Boy Scouts of America have sought bankruptcy protection to cope with a rising tide of claims tied to sexual abuse of children in its ranks. The group filed under Chapter 11 early this morning, listing liabilities of up to $1 billion and assets of as much as $10 billion. The Texas-based group is also setting up a trust fund to compensate victims. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It is 9:20 in the city of London. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. Today we're joined by opinion columnist Alex Webb, who writes about tech for the team. And Alex, today you're going to discuss Apple's announcement with us, although we could talk about so many things. I mean, tech stories are hot today, right? You've got Huawei, you've got Facebook. But we'll kick it off with the biggest. Is it still the biggest? The world's biggest?
It is not, no. But it's kind of, actually, no, it is right now. It is slightly bigger than Microsoft. Or actually, no, forget Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco is a bigger by market.
Ah, right. Okay. So one of the most valuable, one of the $1 trillion club companies, Apple, is not going to meet its quarterly guidance because of the coronavirus.
Yes, it's basically a function of affecting demand and supply. Actually, Apple is able to ensure that there's plenty of demand for its iPhone simply because everybody has one. They've got all their data in iOS. They're using all Apple's other apps and services. But if people physically can't get to the stores to buy them, then that creates a bit of a demand issue. And in China, that is absolutely what is happening. Over the kind of Chinese New Year period, which would have been a big time for Apple to sell smartphones in China, lots of people had to stay at home. They were quarantined. And that also means that as we head into the next quarter, which is into March at least, we are expecting a new iPhone, a low-end iPhone, a little bit cheaper, follow-up to the iPhone SE. That iPhone will be be made in China. At the moment, it's looking like it's going to be hard to get the manpower into the factories to build the thing. They usually have a bit of a production ramp up where they bring in hundreds of thousands of workers from all around China for these big peak periods. That's proving a little bit difficult, and I would absolutely recommend that people read the story on the Terminal Online by our colleagues Mark Gurman and Debbie Wu, where they've spoken to a lot of people who do the hiring for Apple who are saying exactly that.
Yeah, I just running a quick FE11 Go to see what the Saudi company, Saudi Aramco, is worth in dollars. $1.76 trillion is the current value of Saudi Aramco, and the current value of Apple before it starts trading today is $1.42 billion. Of course, it's going to drop by about 4%, or at least that's what the pre-market is showing right now. Analysts still seem to like this company quite a lot. I mean, if you look at the ANR function, you can see there are 28 buys and only 19 holds and sells. So many more buys, and they are sticking with it throughout this one quarter drop. Do they expect a big bounce back?
Yes, I think the argument is that there remains the underlying demand. It's not that people don't want to buy iPhones, it's just they're not able to buy iPhones in China. And ultimately, China is about a sixth of its total revenue, 40 billion of about 270 billion global revenue. One of the reasons that Apple, having lost its crown as at least the most valuable US company for a period, is because of the surge enjoyed by Amazon and to an extent Google and Facebook. There's been a certain cycle out of the growth stocks and seeking of value, and Apple, of course, generates a huge amount of value for shareholders, returns tens of billions of dollars a year to its investors in the form of buybacks usually, and that is something which has meant that it's retained a lot of demand.
Microsoft, by the way, also worth more than 1.4 trillion. So after Apple drops in the open, if Microsoft doesn't drop in sympathy, it'll probably be worth more. Let me quickly ask you about Huawei. It looks like the U.S. is getting more dramatic in its language as far as the spying allegations are concerned. Europe's still going to use the equipment, though.
It is. It's quite hard for Europe not to use the equipment because ultimately Huawei is in most countries' networks. And so the ability to cut that out and ensure that they don't layer on the 5G equipment is all but impossible for all of these countries.
All right, Alex, thanks very much for joining us. Alex Webb is a Bloomberg Opinion columnist talking to us about, well, for the most part, Apple, but it's always interesting to talk about Huawei as well, especially as Nancy Pelosi heats up the rhetoric a little bit. She says having Huawei in your network is like having the state police in your pocket. I'm not sure if she knows what in your pocket really means, but we get her drift. This is Bloomberg.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. With the NASCAR season now underway, the racing governing body announced a deal with Verizon intended to give fans at its 12 racetracks better access for their phones and solve a long, simmering headache over dead zones at the sprawling venues. The deal will improve connectivity at the 12 tracks owned by NASCAR, a problem fans have complained about for years. That's even when they had Sprint and Nextel as their sponsors. Originally from Japan, Naomi Osaka beat 23-time Grand Slam winner Serena Williams to win the U.S. Open in 2018 and followed it by winning the Australian Open the following year. Now, popular streaming service Netflix will make a documentary on the two-time Grand Slam winner. They're still looking for a title for the film. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr, brought to you by Grainger, America's trusted source for industrial and safety supplies. Visit Grainger.com.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Portfolio Analyst, powered by Interactive Brokers, helps sophisticated investors understand the health of their complete financial portfolio. Portfolio Analyst is free and easy-to-use personal finance software that creates a consolidated view of banking, brokerage, and credit card accounts. Compare your consolidated portfolio against more than 200 benchmarks or create customized benchmarks for analyzing performance. Calculate time and money-weighted rates of return and use Portfolio Analyst for forecasting. Sign up for free at portfolioanalyst.com.
Why has JD...
Downward-facing dog.
Loren here knows her downward-facing dog from her one-legged king pigeon. Well, you'd need to if you run your own hot yoga business.
Cobra.
But she'd prefer to be working on her warrior pose than on her finances. That's why she got QuickBooks. Now she can get paid, track income, and run payroll all in one place. Because no matter how hot the yoga studio gets, running her business is no sweat.
Visit quickbooks.co.uk for details. Intuit QuickBooks.
Good morning, this is your Southern service to London Victoria. Join in our onboard quiz. Here's our next clue. What sea sounds like a handheld party food but keeps you dry and protected from the rain? Not canapes, canopies.
At Southern Railway, we're investing over £7 million into making improvements for you, like canopies, cycle parking and new platform lighting across more of our stations. Find out more and book your tickets at southernrailway.com. Southern Railway, we're with you.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Major League Baseball is back. Are you ready to unlock the 2020 season with TuneIn Premium?
And this one is gone! It hits the foul pole!
Be there from day one with every single game of spring training, rivalry games, split squads, Cactus League, Grapefruit League. TuneIn Premium has it all. Then, when the pitch count starts for real, experience live and on-demand access to every game, everywhere you go, from opening day to the World Series. Don't miss out on the action. Search Premium to upgrade today.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn. When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning from the European headquarters in London. I'm Matt Miller. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on DAB digital radio, or you could be listening very early in New York on Sirius XM. It is the first trading day of the week for Americans after taking off for President's Day yesterday. Nonetheless, we're going to focus on the UK just for a moment here. We get October-December basic wage growth in the UK slowing, but to 3.2%. The estimate was for 3.3%. We also got fourth quarter employment in the UK rising 180,000. Unemployment falling 16,000. So we're getting the British data, if you will, right now, and it doesn't look that bad, although it is slightly missing estimates. There's a lot of talk about what the budget's going to look like here, about what the Bank of England's going to do here as well. But right now we have the jobless numbers and the wage gain numbers coming out just below estimates. So we'll continue to look at the markets and see what that does. As far as the pound, it's bounced back a little bit, but still under $1.30. Right now, 129.91 is that level. Still in the red a little bit, but it had been weaker earlier. Gilts are trading for 61 basis points right now. That's the yield on UK 10-year debt. In terms of what we see across other data points, for example, the equity indexes today, they are down across the board. We're looking at a drop on the FTSE of about 0.5% right now. The CAC 40 in Paris down 2/3%, and the DAX down more than 0.8%, on concern about the spread of the coronavirus after Apple said it won't be able to meet its full quarter revenue targets because of the virus, because of the delay in getting back to business. U.S. futures, and remember, first trading day of the week for the U.S., they are right now looking also quite red, with NASDAQ futures down almost 1%. Dow and S&P mini contracts are down just 0.5%. So tech stocks will clearly do worse than your old economy companies in terms of the trade when the markets open there. Quick look at the U.S. 10-year yield, 1.54%. And if you pull up the long bond in the U.S., the 30-year yield right now at 1.989%. So the 30-year yield falling below 2%, down to the lowest level since September of last year, but not at a record low. 1.95% was the record low for the long bond yield, and we hit that last year. Let's get over to another top story. HSBC slashing about 15% of its workforce and taking $7.3 billion in charges for a restructuring. The biggest bank in Europe wants to reduce about 35,000 jobs as it faces challenges, including the protests in Hong Kong and the coronavirus. Manus Krani and Naira Chayich earlier spoke exclusively with the CFO, Ewan Stevenson.
We are shrinking in areas where we think that we have clear underperformance and a lack of long-term sustainable competitive advantage. Equally, in today's plan, what you see is significant investment in those parts of the business where we do think we have competitive advantage and we can grow. So I think we're absolutely doing both of those things.
Yeah, it definitely was an interesting comment from one of the shareholders, and sort of laid the options for HSBC, Ewan, as fairly binary. What you're saying is that you're kind of balancing those two sides of the coin. Are you happy that you're getting the balance right from those two binary options?
We think this is the right thing for the bank to do, the right plan for now. We are looking to invest $100 billion of risk-weighted assets, around $14 to $15 billion of capital in the next 3 years in parts of the business that are performing well, particularly Asia. So we do think this is the right balance. It's coupled with a very substantive cost reduction program, coupled with organizational simplification to allow us to speed up the pace of execution. We think it's a great plan.
You just pick up on the risk-weighted assets. I could say to you probably you're at that moment of leaning into not bad asset price markets and a hunger for yield. The risk-weighted assets you're going to sell, just a little bit more complexion on them before we go.
Unsurprisingly, it's in parts of the business, the markets business in global banking and markets. I think we are intending to exit a lot of domestically focused customers in Europe and the US on the global banking side. And we're also going to exit international customers that are not producing acceptable returns today. So I think we're going to be quite surgical and ruthless in terms of targeting those parts of the business where we're not generating acceptable returns. We're going to take those risk-weighted assets and reinvest them in parts of the business where we can see much better returns.
Yeah, just very finally, Ewan, on the US business, just characterize for us what that's going to look like. We know the numbers, but what exactly are you trying to achieve?
Look, two things. I think on the retail side, we're getting back to where we think we have core competitive advantages in servicing the diaspora population in the US and international customers. So what you see is a 30% reduction in the branch network, predominantly focused on the East Coast and building branch presence on the West Coast. And secondly, on the global market side, reducing our presence in the US quite materially and looking to concentrate more of that business into London.
And that was Ewan Stevenson, the Chief Financial Officer of HSBC, speaking exclusively to Manus Krani and Naira Chayich after the bank said it may cut 35 100,000 jobs. Now let's get the latest in global news headlines. For more, we go to Bloomberg's Sandra Kilhoff, and she has the news on UK's new Brexit negotiator.
Yes, good morning, Matt. David Frost has launched an unprecedented attack on the EU's conditions for a Brexit deal. Bloomberg's Sebastian Salek says each side is taking the strongest possible position ahead of talks in March.
Frost's opening barrage has been both public and highly confrontational. He dismissed Brussels' position that Britain should abide by EU rules as part of any trade deal, saying it simply fails to see the point of what we're doing. France's Foreign Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, warned the talks would be brutal. They're certainly starting that way. In London, I'm Sebastian Salek, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Singapore has unveiled a series of support packages to help cushion the economy against the impact of the coronavirus. Finance Minister Heng Swee Keat is launching support for businesses and consumers totaling 5.6 billion Singapore dollars.
With these uncertainties, I know Singaporeans are understandably very concerned about the impact on our businesses and jobs. I will introduce two special packages with a total budget of $5.6 billion.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Addis Ababa for his first official tour of Africa. Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams says it includes stops in Senegal and Angola.
The meetings are meant to show support for what the U.S. calls dynamic leadership on the continent. The U.S. is also seeking new business and economic partnerships as it pushes back against China's increasingly assertive push of its own for economic dominance in countries across Africa. In Addis Ababa, Nick Wadhams, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has committed at least $10 billion to fight climate change. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports.
On an Instagram post, he says it's going to take collective action from big companies, small companies, nation states, global organizations, and individuals. We can save Earth. He's been under pressure from employees for practices they say will injure the Earth long term, things like packaging. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg.
You know what I would do if I had $10 billion to fight climate change?
What would you do, Matt?
I think I would buy like 1,000 Ferraris.
How on earth does that help climate change?
Because then nobody else would be able to drive them but me.
So would you just keep them on hold, like in a museum,
yes.
a Matt Miller Museum of Ferraris,
exactly.
where they can't pollute?
I mean, maybe I would get some Rolls Royces. I would probably buy some old Ford pickup trucks. But generally, I would just collect internal combustion engines so that I would be the only one who's allowed to drive them.
And so at some point, the automakers will just, stop producing them? Because you bought all of them?
They're switching over to electrics already. So I would just buy all the old ones. Sandra, thanks very much. Sandra Kilhoff there with your World National News. Let's get your European sports report now with Colin Besley. Colin?
Manchester United are now within 3 points of the Premier League's top four. They got a 2-0 win at Chelsea, who currently occupy the final Champions League automatic qualification spot. United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer tells Sky Sports News the result gives them a chance, but there's plenty of work to do. Holders Liverpool continue their Champions League defence with a trip to Spain tonight. The runaway Premier League leaders face Atletico Madrid in the first leg of their last 16 tie. Jurgen Klopp's side are among the favourites to lift the trophy again, but they can expect a tough night. And Kyle Edmund returns to action this evening after winning his first ATP tennis title in 16 months at the weekend. The British number 3 follows victory in the New York Open with his first match in the Delray Beach Open against Hugo Humbert of France in Florida. Before that, Cameron Norrie faces American third seed Taylor Fritz in the opening round of the tournament.
All right, so that was your European sports report. When we come back, we're going to talk with William Hobbs, CIO at Barclays Wealth and Investments, joining me, and we're going to get his take on the coronavirus impact on supply chains. By the way, if you have Bloomberg in front of you, type SPLC for any equity to check out its supply chain. This is Bloomberg.
Right now, Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
Investors who put their money on the line to help build U.S. infrastructure deserve to be protected. That's what we do at BAM. Our unconditional guarantee means investors receive every payment of interest and principal when due, period. BAM-insured bonds have a high AA stable rating from S&P, and BAM credit profiles provide complete transparency on each and every transaction. BAM-insured bonds help build America's essential public projects. BAM, the feeling is mutual.
Rich is just a really good guy. The term good egg isn't enough to describe him. He's also certified organic and free range. Rich puts the cap back on everything. The toothpaste, the olive oil, the shampoo, everything. He lets his 10-year-old nephew beat him at virtual tennis, even though he can straight up slay his 10-year-old nephew in virtual tennis. When the toilet paper is running low, Rich replaces the roll on the actual holder, not just on the back of the toilet. Rich is texting and driving. Rich? No. What are you doing, Rich? I was just telling everyone how great you are. Texting and driving makes good people look bad. Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
All right, Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, I'll try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL Scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Send message to Elise. Salut, sorry, I'm running late. Just in the car now. Send. I forgot the cake. Send. Actually, great news. SatNav has found a new route. See you in 10.
Message on the move in the Citroen C1 and stay connected. Experience Citroen C1, available from £149 per month with initial rental of £149. Citroen. Please drive responsibly. Citroen UK Limited is a credit broker, not a lender. Personal lease. You will not own the vehicle. Offer on fuel VTI 725 speed manual, 6,000 miles per annum. Guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility criteria and return conditions apply. PSA Finance UK Limited.
Good morning. This is your Southern service to London, Victoria. Join in our onboard quiz. Here's our next clue. What C sounds like a handheld party food but keeps you dry and protected from the rain? Not canapes, canopies.
At Southern Railway, we're investing over £7 million into making improvements for you, like canopies, cycle parking and new platform lighting across more of our stations. Find out more and book your tickets at southernrailway.com. Southern Railway, we're with you.
Major League Baseball is back. Are you ready to unlock the 2020 season with TuneIn Premium?
And this one is gone! It hits the foul pole!
Be there from day one with every single game of spring training, rivalry games, split squads, Cactus League, Grapefruit League. TuneIn Premium has it all. Then, when the pitch count starts for real, experience live and on-demand access to every game, everywhere you go, from opening day to the World Series. Don't miss out on the action. Search Premium to upgrade today.
Right now, instead of hearing this, you could be listening to the music that keeps you moving with TuneIn Premium. Find today's biggest songs and all of your favorites commercial-free. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade. Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters here in London, I'm Caroline Hepker with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. So in terms of the European markets this morning, we're down by 0.5% on the Euro Stoxx 600. A warning by Apple that quarterly sales would miss forecasts has really triggered the risk-off day that we saw in Asia and now handing off into Europe. The Xetra DAX right now down 0.7%. Nasdaq futures also continue to fall, down 0.9% at the moment. Major Asian indices closed in the red earlier, just with the exception of the Shenzhen Comp. In terms of individual stocks that I'm looking at, HSBC shares dropped 5.7% as the bank outlines plans to slash headcount by 35,000 over 3 years. Also, Glencore dropping as almost 3% as the commodity trader writes down $2.8 billion in coal, oil and copper assets. Well, speaking of commodities, we see a fall for oil prices and copper this hour. In terms of WTI, crude futures were down by 1.6% this morning. Also, markets looking to the ZEW survey from Germany. That drops at 10 a.m. So we'll be looking for direction there. German Bund yields at negative 42 basis points. They're also dropping 2 basis points. US Treasury yields currently at 1.54%. Gilt yields drop 3 basis points to 61 basis points. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index slightly stronger. The pound weakens 1/10%, trading at 1.2995, and the euro trades at 1.0830. So that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Sandra Kelhoff with all the latest in global news. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Swarms of desert locusts are spreading through East Africa, destroying crops and pastures. The UN is calling it the worst outbreak in recent memory and warning of an unprecedented threat to food security. And the situation will probably get worse if this year's wild weather continues, as locust swarms grow in an increased number of cyclones. The travel ban to Hong Kong has left thousands of Philippine migrant workers stranded. The so-called helpers are critical to both economies, enabling hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers to work outside the home. And the money sent home to the Philippines contributes to more than $30 billion in remittances that make up about 9% of the country's GDP. And one of the world's richest corners has become a magnet for a growing number of Wall Street firms. The Nordic countries have a surplus of cash after years of central bank stimulus, and that's prompting banks to line up with advice on everything from money management to M&A. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs and Neuberger Berman are amongst those expanding operations or creating new offices in the Nordic region. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sandra Kilhoff. This is Bloomberg. Matt Miller.
Does Denmark count as the Nordic region?
We are the premier Nordic country, Matt Miller.
Okay. I just never know. I guess Scandinavia is the three.
Yes, so Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, and the Nordics includes Finland and Iceland.
I see. Okay, so you add Finland. Excellent.
Exactly.
So are the banks chasing you then?
Well, I haven't been chased yet, but supposedly they're chasing all the ones leaving Nordea and Danske Bank, so who knows?
Your incredible wealth. Sandra Kilhoff, with a wealth of knowledge for us in the global headlines. Let's get over to Nathan Hager right now in D.C. He's got a wealth of knowledge prepared to spring it on you this morning at Daybreak with Daybreak Americas and Karen Moscow. Nathan, what are you prepping?
We will most certainly try to add to it this morning as we head into a holiday shortened trading week. Good morning, Matt. We're going to be keeping a close eye on Apple in the pre-market. Lower this morning after the company's warning that it is going to miss quarterly guidance that had already been pretty wide due to the coronavirus. But we're seeing a knock-on effect from that announcement on stocks around the world, particularly in tech. Is this the coronavirus inflection point? We're going to check in with Christina Hooper, Chief Global Market Strategist at Invesco, to get her view. And we will also have more on the massive overhaul plan announced by HSBC in its earnings report. Tens of thousands of job cuts coming and a new focus on Asia investment despite the coronavirus and the Hong Kong protests. Karen Moscow and I will have more on all that coming up here on Bloomberg Daybreak. Hope you'll join us for it. Matt.
By the way, how was your President's Day?
Not too bad. We had a pretty jam-packed 3-day weekend. We were just talking before the show. Wouldn't be a problem if they were all 3-day weekends.
No, I think that would be fantastic.
I would not complain.
Yeah, I think, although I'm not typically for increased government intervention and regulation,
sure.
I wouldn't mind if somebody decreed a 4-day work week.
All right, the government has to impose it, but
no, God could tell us only to work 4 days a week. That would be good. Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow coming up next with more out of the U.S. If you're listening here in London on DAB digital radio in the city, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Francine Lacroix. Right now, let's talk about the real big moves in the market of late have come not from trade, but from the coronavirus. And that is certainly the story today, given that tech giant Apple says it won't meet its quarterly guidance because of the spread of the virus and is still concerned about uncertainties going forward. The problem, of course, is for Apple's supply chain. Many manufacturers see that, but also for demand. So it's kind of hit on both sides. Joining me in the London studio to talk a little bit more about this is William Hobbs. He's the CIO at Barclays Wealth and Investments. Will, thanks for coming in. There's always been concern about this virus, the spread of the virus, whether or not it turns into a pandemic, but you can see that the market's concern has been capped by the continuation of the buy the dip strategy and rallies back to record highs. Is that going to change as this drags out longer and longer and continues to hit supply chains and demand?
Yeah, great question, Matt. Just on your reducing the working days week, I saw a study the other day, actually, that the 3-day week in the UK, productivity didn't actually suffer that much. So it's not...
I've actually seen those studies as well. Yeah. If you work, there's shorter amount of time at work, you're willing to work harder. The question is, how long does that effect last?
Sustain. Yes.
But I still think we should try it.
Yeah, I definitely think we should try it. But anyway, so back to your question. I guess the problems we've got at the moment, there are many, because we are fumbling around in the dark more than usual in terms of the outlook for the economy. The data we're going to get over the next couple of months is not going to leave us much the wiser. So people are trying to look at this high frequency data on China, on everything from, air quality to, hotel RevPAR, all this kind of stuff. And it's telling us that activity is, pretty much fallen in half in many of the sectors and operating, it's stabilized a bit, but it has fallen a long way from its usual seasonal levels. Now there you're looking, that's just the sort of activity level. And then also you're looking at the sort of ripples up the supply chain, which you're seeing from Apple. And I think the interesting thing from stock markets so far is that they seem to be looking through to the other side of this blip, which is really what most economists are saying. Look back at previous episodes and it's something that's temporary, but, you regain a lot of that activity later on. I guess that is the bond market is looking at it a slightly different way. So yields are still a long way south of where they were at the beginning of the year.
We saw the 30-year yield, the long bond, dip below 2% again today.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, for the first time since, I think, September of last year. 1.98% is what you get for lending your money to the government, the U.S. government, for 30 years.
It's amazing. I mean, you don't get much more than that for lending to the Greek government for 10 years. Do you know what I mean? The yield story is really incredible. And that's not the dash for safety, obviously. But if you look at the safe haven yields around the world, they really indicate that there is a bit of a different narrative going on in stock and bond markets potentially.
1.5 on the 10-year. And if you look at although people haven't piled into the yen. I guess $1 is considered a safe haven as well.
Yeah.
Right now you've got gold at 1560, about a troy ounce. Bitcoin at 10,000. If you think of that as a safe haven,
I would think of that as the opposite.
You might. I was going to say you might want to have. You might want to visit the doctor. If you look at the. And by the way, to your point, I spoke with the CEO of Intercontinental Hotels Group today, and he said, look, in the past, we had been hit by these epidemics. SARS, for example, they have a huge exposure to Asia. But we bounce back immediately after. And I can understand in the hospitality that makes sense. But in manufacturing, it must be more difficult because your supply chains have to take a while to restart.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And one of the big questions I think that we have at the moment, really, and this is not just this, but all the other factors going on, is are people going to increasingly think about the length of their supply chains? There's environmental factors to think about there, increasing heat that long-range shipping is going to get over the next few years, the regulatory aspect as well. You may find that this is part of the the sort of straw that breaks the camel's back on, some of these longer term, these longer supply chains. But in the short run, you're really looking for where the tension is, where the inventories are low. And quite a lot of that is in tech land. You tend to find that autos have slightly higher inventory, so they're managing to digest it a little bit more so far, providing it is a temporary hit.
But exactly. So, that's the uncertainty. Could this be the straw that breaks the camel's back on
the economic cycle?
On the long bull market.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely worth considering, because always in these situations, it's hard to know with great confidence how confidence is going to evolve. And this could, alongside the chunk being taken out of US Q1 GDP by Boeing, and along with a few other factors besides, you may find that this is the thing. Our suspicion is not, the resilience of things like the US consumer and developed world consumption still give us a bit of faith that this cycle can roll on. But, you got to, these are risks, certainly.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time this morning. And I know that you'll be going on television here, so our listeners can become viewers if they just switch on the TV and watch William Hobbs, CIO at Barclays Wealth and Investments, go on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom and Francine. Or if you're listening on London DAB in the city, you'll still hear Will, because we'll broadcast surveillance on DAB Digital as well. If you're listening on Sirius XM, I say good morning to you, and I welcome you back to a shortened week at work. This will be the first trading day of the week in the U.S. after the President's Day holiday yesterday. Watch out for those tech stocks as the NASDAQ futures are down 0.9%. This is Bloomberg.
It was a Sunday morning when I jumped on the tube
and decided to pop down to Greenwich via
a large indoor jungle.
And when I got there, I was captivated by a sparkling
scary dinosaur just standing there right in front of me.
So off we went to Wembley Park
to look at the colourful fish.
Tap into the wonderful world of off-peak London. Travel in zones 2 to 6 for £1.50. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. £1.50 is an adult off-peak pay-as-you-go fare for a journey not going via Zone 1 on Tube, DLR and most London Overground services. Always touch in and out with the same card or device to pay the right fare.
What do you do to be an everyday superhero, like Mary?
So I know it's tempting to pour used cooking oil straight down the sink, but I spoke to the local council and they said the best way to get rid of oil or fat is to collect it, once it's cooled down, of course, in a used container. And then you can scoop it out and put it in the bin.
Cooking oils and fats block thousands of pipes every year. Save our sewers, rivers and seas by putting them in the bin, where they belong. Visit thameswater.co.uk/bin it. Together, we can care for the environment.
Do you do the same thing every weekend? Meet up with the same friends for brunch, browse around the same shops, eat the same Saturday night takeaway. Mine's a lamb balti with mushroom pilau rice. Snuggle up next to the same person and watch the same brain-numbing reality TV. Then maybe it's time to switch it up. Starting with the all-new Vauxhall Corsa, with its bold styling and up to 70 miles per gallon. To switch it up, visit your local Vauxhall dealership or search New Corsa. Official WLTP test figures for comparison purposes only. Real-world figures may vary.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
Global stocks slump as Apple warns the coronavirus will hit sales.
New infection numbers stoke hopes that the outbreak is nearing its peak.
HSBC announces massive cost cuts with plans to slash 35,000 jobs.
U.S. futures fall, oil tumbles, and 30-year Treasury yields dip below 2%.
The Boy Scouts file for bankruptcy, plus ex-National Security Advisor Bolton warns of possible White House censorship of his memoir. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm Rob Bushka. Ahead in sports, the Islanders come up short in the desert. A disturbing crash at Daytona. The Yankees and Mets have officially reported to spring training.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York. Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 106.1 Boston. Bloomberg 960 San Francisco. Sirius XM 119. And around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by SEI. Visionary asset managers find opportunity where others are challenged. Exploit disruption's potential with SEI's global operating platform. Find out how at SEIC.com/IMS.
And U.S. futures tumbling to start the week. 5:01 on Wall Street. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 17 points. Dow futures down 163. NASDAQ futures down 86. The DAX in Germany's down 0.7%. And the CAC in Paris and FTSE 100 down 0.5%. 10-year Treasury up 13.30 seconds. Yield 1.54%. Yield on the 2-year 1.39%. NYMEX crude oil down 1.7%. Down 88 cents at 51.17 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.33% or $5.40 at 15.91.90 an ounce. The euro 1.0823 against the dollar. The yen 109.71. Nathan.
Karen, the economic hit from the coronavirus is hitting corporate America. Apple says its quarterly sales will miss forecasts as the outbreak hurts both supply and demand. Some analysts predict a quick rebound, while others worry the effects could linger. Dan Ives is managing director of equity research at Wedbush Securities.
We think this is more of a timing issue, and you'll see a significant rebound to June and September in terms of iPhone demand, which would also be across the supply chain. So I view more as a timing issue rather than one that significantly dents demand.
Apple says factories in China are getting back to work slower than expected, while most of its retail stores in the country remain closed. Mehdi Hosseini is a senior analyst at Susquehanna Financial.
This is not entirely surprising. I think the number one question is more to do with not knowing what happens to the demand. If there is a demand destruction that is going to sustain for more than 1 or 2 quarters, we could actually see more of a broad-based slowdown.
Tech stocks in Europe and Asia slid on that forecast from Apple. A flight to safety has the yield on 30-year treasuries below 2%, its lowest level since September. Alicia Garcia Herrero is chief Asia-Pacific economist at Natixis.
You're bound to have supply chain effects because China is at the center of the supply chain. Frankly, the stock market doesn't want to hear this news. Everybody's trying to cry at the fact that the supply chain constraints will affect them. The stock market will react. It's just a question of time.
The NASDAQ futures are down nearly 1% as Apple weighs on the index. Shares of Apple are down more than 3% in the pre-market.
Meantime, the coronavirus continues to spread, though the number of new cases shows signs of stabilizing. We get the very latest now from Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie in Beijing.
The total number now for China in terms of infections, almost 72,500. The numbers of fatalities, 1,868. And the numbers out of Hubei province have risen at the slowest pace since this change in methodology last week. So certainly that's a positive, but it's worth reiterating the comments that we've heard from the World Health Organization, who've said, look, it's still too early to say if this is truly declining.
Colleges and schools in Shanghai will remain shut through March, while casinos in Macau reopen on Thursday. A top expert in China says the outbreak could peak in parts of the country this month.
Concern over the virus and its impact on Apple weighed on stocks in Asia overnight. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally joins us now from Singapore with details. Good morning, Juliet.
Good morning, Nathan and Karen. The Nikkei 225 fell 1.4% in Tokyo to 23,193 points as Apple suppliers, including TDK and Tokyo Electron, were sold off. In China, the CSI 300 gave back some of Monday's stellar gains, but still remained above pre-Lunar New Year sell-off levels. In Seoul, the Kospi was down 1.5% as President Moon Jae-in said the spreading of the coronavirus is an emergency for South Korea's economy and called for extraordinary steps to minimize its impact. In Singapore, I'm Juliet Saleh, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Juliet, thank you. In London, HSBC is warning the outbreak will impact performance this year. We spoke exclusively with Chief Financial Officer Ewan Stevenson.
I do think we're going to have to take some additional provisions this quarter as a result of that, but very much a call on how long does the virus continue for.
At the same time, HSBC is announcing a dramatic overhaul. It plans to slash about 35,000 jobs at underperforming units in the U.S. and Europe.
We're going to be quite surgical and ruthless in terms of targeting those parts of the business where we're not generating acceptable returns. We're going to take those risk-weighted assets and reinvest them in parts of the business where we can see much better returns.
HSBC is targeting cost reductions of $4.5 billion over a 3-year period. For more on those cuts and exactly where they could hit, we bring in Bloomberg London finance reporter Harry Wilson.
You're really looking here at Europe and the US, and in particular looking at the investment bank where a lot of these cuts are going to come. Quite a bit of this could come through some asset disposals. We obviously know that the French retail bank is on the block, and then you've also got chatter about Turkey, Oman, and several other countries which could also be cut. So it's not hard to see how they get to that 35,000 job cut number.
And with those reductions in the U.S. and Europe, HSBC plans to accelerate investment in Asia despite risks from protests in Hong Kong and the coronavirus outbreak. We get more from a Bloomberg opinion columnist, Marcus Ashworth.
It's doubling down on its Asian presence. That's where it makes all its money. 90% of its profits have traditionally always come from Hong Kong. It's quite a gamble in theory with regards to what happens as far as China's economy and Hong Kong in particular. But nonetheless, it's telling you that it's too tough for the scale of its risk-weighted assets and its capital it has in Europe, that it can make better money in a less competitive, more monopolistic market share that it has in Asia.
HSBC is taking more than $7 billion in charges related to the restructuring. So far, investors don't love the plan. Shares are down more than 6% in London.
Hey, Karen, we have economic data crossing the Bloomberg terminal from Germany this morning. Investor expectations for the month of February fall to 8.7%, or it's 8.7. That is well below estimates. Futures pointing to a lower open this morning on Wall Street. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg. And at 5:07 on Wall Street, we bring in Michael Barr for a check of what's happening around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. The Boy Scouts of America has filed for bankruptcy protection as it faces a barrage of new sex abuse lawsuits. The filing today in Wilmington, Delaware, is an attempt to work out a compensation plan for abuse victims that would allow the 110-year-old organization to carry on. Scores of lawyers are seeking settlements on behalf of several thousand men who say they were molested as boys by Scout leaders decades ago. The organization could be forced to sell off some of its vast property holdings. More than 2,000 former Justice Department officials are calling on Attorney General William Barr to resign. In a rare statement, mostly from former career prosecutors, Mr. Barr's actions in doing the president's personal bidding, unfortunately, speak louder than his words. Democratic Senator Ben Cardin was asked if the Department of Justice still has credibility.
I think they're great people, independent people who work for the Department of Justice. I think its leadership has badly soiled the reputation of the Department of Justice.
Career prosecutors withdrew from the case after Barr overruled their sentencing recommendation in the Roger Stone case. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton is concerned the Trump administration could block his memoir that describes his interaction with the president over Ukraine. Bolton, speaking at Duke University, says we'll have to see what comes out of the censorship. Bolton adds, I say things in the manuscript about what he said to me, referring to President Trump. I hope they become public someday. He tweets, but I can't talk about it. How fair is that? Democratic presidential candidates are campaigning ahead of Nevada's caucuses on Saturday. The state's Democratic Party says more than 26,000 people participated in the first 2 days of early voting. Democratic National Committee Chair Tom Perez explains that his party is working hard to avoid a repeat of the technical issues that plagued the Iowa caucuses.
There's no app being used to tabulate. That was a problem in Iowa. And again, I think one of the lessons I learned from Iowa is we're redoubling our efforts to make sure that people are ready for Saturday.
Amazon founder Jeff Bezos announced the creation of the Bezos Earth Fund. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
Bezos says he's starting with $10 billion and will begin to issue grants in a few months. On an Instagram post, he says it's going to take collective action from big companies, small companies, nation states, global organizations, and individuals. We can save Earth. He's been under pressure from employees for practices they say will injure the Earth long term, things like packaging. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak.
And I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan?
All right, Michael, thank you. We're coming up to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update with Rob Bushka.
Good morning, Nathan. The Islanders had the New York sports landscape to themselves on Monday, but they fell in a President's Day matinee 2-1 in Arizona. Islanders coach Barry Trotz.
When we talk about a game of inches, it's really a game of centimeters right now. Our team kept battling, and that's something that's a real positive. I mean, I thought, as much as they deserve to win my game, so did we.
Anthony Beauvillier had the lone goal in the third period for the Isles, who were tied for third in the Metro Division with the Blue Jackets. Both New York teams are off on Tuesday. The Devils face the champs, the Blues, on the road at 8 o'clock. NASCAR held its Super Bowl, the Daytona 500, Monday after rain postponed the race 24 hours. All eyes were on one of the most horrific crashes witnessed in years by Ryan Newman. Executive Vice President Steve O'Donnell.
Ryan Newman is being treated at Halifax Medical Center. He's in serious condition, but doctors have indicated his injuries are non-life-threatening. We appreciate your thoughts and prayers and ask that you respect the privacy of Ryan and his family during this time. We appreciate your patience and cooperation and will provide more information as it becomes available.
Denny Hamlin took the checkered flag, his third win at Daytona. Baseball, Yankees and Mets have reported to Florida. Yankees skipper Aaron Boone asked if they'll be beating the Astros for sign stealing.
We won't be in the business of, going after or throwing at people on purpose. And, we'll just have to see how everything unfolds. But I don't expect it to be an issue for us.
The Yankees' biggest offseason acquisition, pitcher Garrett Cole, was part of that now infamous 2017 World Series championship team in Houston. College hoops, Xavier went on an 8-0 run to beat St. John's 77-74 at the Garden. And that's your NBC Bloomberg Sports Update. Nathan?
Okay, Rob, thanks. S&P futures are lower by 15 points. Dow futures down 152. NASDAQ futures a loss of almost 79 points.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA/SIPC, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
All right, Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Rita's Rowdy Enchiladas.
Every time the kids are together, it's always the same. Never a moment's peace. Didn't take me long to work out the trick, though. Shredded chicken and black bean enchiladas with lime, oregano, and my little secret. A bit of smoke and spice with chipotle paste. Hear that? Never failed yet.
Make your own Rowdy Enchiladas with Tesco British Chicken. Food Love Stories, brought to you by Tesco.
The Grand DFS sale featuring Wallace.
Hello?
And Gromit.
Well, say hello, lad.
Every sofa is made to order.
By a speedy Sofa-matic machine.
By hand.
Oh, suit yourself.
So you can have your sofa exactly how you want it.
Made of cheese?
Not that exactly.
Oh, probably a good thing, eh, Gromit? It'd be gone in a jiffy.
The Grand DFS sale is now on.
How about a cushion made of cheese? Or a footstool?
Conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
Now, as the coronavirus outbreak ripples through Asia's economies, FX markets are not immune to its effects. Let's take a look at how the deadly virus is impacting currencies. Now with Pepperstone Group Head of Research, Chris Weston. Chris, great to have you with us. Now, we are continuing to see these downgrades on growth forecasts and export forecasts. So even if we did see a bit of a bump in Asia FX, how likely is that to be sustained?
Well, look, I think we could see some high volatility, but I think Apple's numbers today have got us the growth situation on far more on the watch list now. And I think to get that high volatility and that sustained sell-off, what we now need to see is the data really start to meander lower. And obviously that starts this week with the Korean export numbers. And then what we need to see is a disconnect between weakening actual data and central banks not coming to the party. And I think that's where the markets will start seeing high volatility. If we see the data rolling over, but central banks don't necessarily follow suit, I think the market could see some high volatility, and that will resonate in FX as well.
Which are the currencies that are most vulnerable to what's happening in Asia right now?
Well, I mean, everyone's been focused on the Singapore dollar. You talk about the Thai baht on the tourist side of things, and people are being fairly reluctant to buy into those of late.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Stocks are falling in Europe along with U.S. stock index futures after Apple said quarterly sales would miss forecasts, spooking investors who had hoped for a limited economic impact from the deadly coronavirus. Treasuries are rising, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 13 points. Dow futures down 135. NASDAQ futures down 73. The DAX in Germany is down 0.6%. 10-year Treasury up 11/30 seconds. Yield 1.54%. Yield on the 2-year 1.39%. NYMEX crude oil down 1 1/3% or 71 cents at 51.34 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.3% or $4.50 at 15.90 an ounce. The euro 1.0823 against the dollar. British pound 1.3013, and the yen is at 109.73. We continue to watch shares of Apple. They're down 3.2% in the early trade. Today we are looking for reports on New York manufacturing activity out at 8:30 Wall Street time. At 10, it's home builder confidence, and Walmart among companies scheduled to report earnings today. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Boy Scouts of America filed for bankruptcy protection as it faces a barrage of new sex abuse lawsuits. Scores of lawyers are seeking settlements on behalf of several thousand men who say they were molested as boys by Scout leaders decades ago. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton is speaking out after the end of the Senate impeachment trial. Bolton, defiant over his treatment by President Trump, told an audience at Duke University he hopes the White House doesn't censor his upcoming book detailing his time in the White House. In sports, Denny Hamlin won the Daytona 500. Meanwhile, Ryan Newman is in serious condition after a horrific crash at the finish. In the NHL, the Islanders lost along with the Capitals. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thank you. It's 5:19 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Christina Hooper joins us now, Chief Global Market Strategist at Invesco, as we continue to watch markets around the world fall on Apple's revenue warning for the March quarter. Good morning, Christina. We've talked for weeks about the threat from the coronavirus on markets. Could this announcement from Apple be an inflection point?
Well, certainly this announcement from Apple will have a short-term jarring effect because it is symbolic of what we're likely to hear from other companies. But I don't believe that this is going to be any kind of significant longer-term market reaction because we continue to get a lot of policy support coming from China. And, of course, we have other central banks, most notably the Fed, standing ready to provide policy support if needed.
At the same time, we just got the latest investor expectation numbers from the ZEW in Germany. They came in well below expectations. Could that point to a longer-term concern for the market?
Well, we've seen weakness in Europe, particularly Germany, for a while now. So I don't think this is a catalyst for any kind of long-term sell-off. I think this is just a case of short-term jitters. But I do believe that there are certainly important pieces of news flow that are positive. We're seeing stabilization at the epicenter of the contagion. We're seeing policy support coming out from China. And so while we may very well hear other companies warn, clearly there are supply chain disruptions. There's more negative news to be had. I don't think we're going to see any kind of long-term sell-off.
So do you see this as potential buying opportunity in certain sectors if this does turn out to be just a short-term concern?
Certainly. Now, of course, investors need to be cautious right now, but there could very well be opportunities. I've talked about opportunities in Chinese stocks. We did see a strong rebound already there. So I think this is time for a wait and see. When there's a significant enough sell-off, it does make sense to find areas to add to.
You mentioned the Federal Reserve on the sidelines, potentially waiting to step in. They certainly seem to be in wait-and-see mode. What would you be looking for from the data or from market activity to spur the Fed into action potentially?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with expectations about how long this contagion lasts. Keep in mind that we are in such early stages that there's not a lot of visibility on when the coronavirus will truly be contained. And we certainly heard from the WHO last week suggesting that it could go in a variety of different directions, that we shouldn't assume that April would be the beginning of the end of the coronavirus. So I think having more visibility on that, and if there is an expectation that it could last significantly longer, coupled with impacts to revenue as well as a prolonged sell-off, could easily trigger the Fed to act. It's shown us last year that it can certainly provide insurance cuts, and it appears ready to provide insurance cuts this year for a different reason.
Should the markets be concerned about the visibility that they are getting so far from the Chinese government? Are there any concerns about the information that is coming out of the government in China?
Well, I think the bigger issue is really that many market participants are not health experts. They're not medical professionals. And quite frankly, a lot of the medical professionals don't know how long this is going to last. So to me, that uncertainty is the biggest issue.
We heard from Mike Henry of BHP Group overnight. He's saying as long as things are contained within this quarter, expectations will hold up for the rest of the year. Otherwise, forecasts will have to be revised. In our last few seconds here, does that comport with your view?
I think it could certainly extend into the second quarter and not change expectations for the year that much. Keep in mind, we do have a phase one trade deal, so there should be a coiled spring when this virus actually is contained, and we should see an increase in spending that's pretty significant.
Well, thanks for this, Christina. Always good talking with you. That's Christina Hooper, Chief Global Market Strategist at Invesco. And as we take a look at the markets this morning, we are seeing a risk-off mood pervading with the updated guidance and the revenue warning from Apple last night. Right now, S&P futures are lower by 14 points. Dow futures down 145. NASDAQ futures down by 75 points. 10 years up, 12.30 seconds, yield 1.54%. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. investors are back at work today after the President's Day holiday, and right now it looks like a lower open ahead of the shortened week after Apple said it would not meet a revenue target because of the coronavirus. The company said iPhone production is ramping up more slowly than expected, and demand is lower as its China stores remain closed or have reduced hours. Big job cuts are coming to HSBC. The bank says it will do away with as many as 35,000 jobs over 3 years as part of a cost-cutting move aimed at slashing $4.5 billion in spending. Here in the U.S., HSBC also plans to cut branches by 30%. Another retailer has filed for bankruptcy. Pier 1 Imports says it's in talks with multiple potential buyers of the company and said again it plans to close as many as 450 stores. Dow futures down 170 points. NYMEX crude is sliding lower by 1.8%, just above $51 a barrel this morning. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
I'm Peter Jones. Lifting business performance is critical in today's uncertain times. But how do you keep up with changing regulations and rising demands? How do you break free from manual processes to raise productivity? The answer is technology that elevates performance and comes with industry-leading support. Over 1 million UK businesses, including my investment group, trust Sage to manage their finances, operations and people.
Elevate your business today with our free performance review. Visit sage.com/perform.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
All right, Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Teaching shapes lives. If you're thinking of becoming a teacher, our expert teaching advisors can give you the level of support you need to get one step closer to the classroom. Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. Search Get Into Teaching. Advisor support subject to eligibility.
Unmistakable. New York City. From the second you first hear it, like the soundtrack to your favorite film played live. After 7 dream-filled days at sea to do as much or as little as you please, and then you're awake, Brooklyn-bound, sailing silently beneath bridges as the skyline rises from the Hudson to meet you. Bask on your balcony and take your coffee with cream as Lady Liberty welcomes you to the city that never sleeps. That's a world away. That's the transatlantic crossing by Cunard. Discover more at cunard.com. APTA and atoll protected.
Rita's Rowdy Enchiladas.
Every time the kids are together, it's always the same. Never a moment's peace. Didn't take me long to work out the trick, though. Shredded chicken and black bean enchiladas with lime, oregano, and my little secret. A bit of smoke and spice with chipotle paste. Hear that? Never failed yet.
Make your own Rowdy Enchiladas with Tesco British Chicken. Food love stories brought to you by Tesco.
Otto Sergey now checks for better energy deals so you don't have to. Meaning we can all sit back and relax. Can't we, Sergey? Sergey?
Hey? What?
Tell the people that we can sit back and relax.
Oh, we can sit back and relax.
Oh, don't waste energy worrying about energy. Automate it with Otto Sergey. Compare the market. Keep life simple.
Customer preferences determine alerts based on tariff type, payment type, supplier rating, and minimum annual saving of £50.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
It's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. Global stocks are falling as Apple says quarterly sales will miss forecasts. That's unnerving investors who had hoped for a limited impact from the deadly coronavirus. Mehdi Hosseini covers Apple for Susquehanna Financial.
It's more than just Apple, and I think Apple is pretty much a tip of the iceberg. I think other companies will come out and use the Apple as an excuse to reset the bar.
Tech stocks in Europe and Asia slid on the forecast. A flight to safety has the yield on 30-year treasuries below 2%, its lowest level since September, and shares of Apple are down more than 3% in the pre-market.
In the meantime, there are new developments on the virus in the stricken Diamond Princess cruise liner. For that, we turn to Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis in Hong Kong.
China reported 1,886 new coronavirus cases and 98 more deaths. Britain, the latest to evacuate nationals from the cruise liner following Japan, the U.S., Australia, and South Korea. In the meantime, the Hong Kong government is seeking $3.6 billion in spending on virus control. And in neighboring Macau, casinos now look set to reopen on Thursday after being shut for 15 days. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Brian, thank you. In Europe, HSBC is planning to cut about 35,000 staff from its workforce. It'll also take more than $7 billion of charges in a sweeping overhaul. We spoke exclusively with Chief Financial Officer Ewan Stevenson.
We're going to be quite surgical and ruthless in terms of targeting those parts of the business where we're not generating acceptable returns.
Most of those cuts will target staff in the U.S. and Europe. Shares of HSBC are down more than 6% in London.
In deal news, Bloomberg News has learned Franklin Resources is nearing an all-cash offer for asset manager Legg Mason. The deal would create an investing giant with more than $1 trillion in assets under management.
And Dell Technologies is reportedly near a deal to sell its RSA security to a private equity firm. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, which says STG Partners is seeking to buy the unit for more than $2 billion. Now let's get you up to date on how stocks are faring. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 15 points this morning. Dow futures down 153. NASDAQ futures down 79. The DAX in Germany's down 0.7%. 10-year Treasury up 13.30 seconds, yield 1.54%, and the yield on the 2-year 1.39%. NYMEX crude oil's down 1.5% or 80 cents at 51.25 a barrel, and the euro 1.0824 against the dollar. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, thank you, Karen. It's 5:33 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Michael?
Thank you very much, Nathan. The Boy Scouts of America announced today it has filed for bankruptcy protection. The filing comes as the 110-year-old organization faces lawsuits claiming it failed to remove known sexual predators from the organization. The filing puts those lawsuits on hold while the court supervises the payment of some claims and a possible reorganization of the Boy Scouts. Over 2,000 former Justice Department officials are calling on Attorney General William Barr to resign. The rare statement from the officials came after 4 career prosecutors withdrew from a case after Barr overruled their sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Ariana Berg, says she's proud to stand with officials in condemning Bill Barr's actions.
Though it may not result in the resignation of Bill Barr, my hope is that this becomes a battle cry across all parties for the oath of preserving the integrity and the impartiality of the Department of Justice that I love so much.
Meanwhile, the Federal Judges Association has called an emergency meeting. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton warned the Trump administration could block his memoir that describes his interaction with the president over Ukraine. Speaking at Duke University, Bolton says the book includes comments President Trump made to him. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos says he's created the Bezos Earth Fund, his biggest ever philanthropic investment to help counter the effects of climate change. More from Bloomberg's Mark Mills.
Bezos is starting with $10 billion and will begin to issue grants in a few months. In an Instagram post on Monday, Bezos said to save the Earth, it's going to take collective action from big companies, small companies, nation states, global organizations, and individuals. Amazon has been criticized both internally and from outside the company for heavy fossil fuel use in its ubiquitous delivery of goods. Bezos is under pressure to offset the environmental consequences of the rapid growth of online shopping. The world's richest person, Bezos has a net worth of more than $130 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. Mark Mills, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Michael, thanks. It's 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Good morning, Rob Bushka.
Good morning, Nathan. Tough loss for the Islanders on the road Monday, 2-1 in the desert against the Coyotes. Islanders coach Barry Trotz.
You just stick with it, and you get rewarded. And he couldn't get a second puck behind him. So, and then on their second goal, we ice it, and then they get a loose puck there. You got to just do our job a little bit there. And we didn't get it done.
Anthony Beauvillier, the lone goal in a losing cause. The loss keeps New York tied for third in the Metro with Columbus, who plays tonight, as does New Jersey. They visit St. Louis at 8 o'clock. Both New York teams skate on Wednesday. NASCAR is the only sport to begin its season with a championship event, the Daytona 500. Denny Hamlin won the race for the third time in his career, thankful for his team.
I couldn't do it without the race team. The cars are so fast, and just been very fortunate. Each win has been so different in the way that we've won them, but I tell you, each one has got a special place in my heart for it.
Hamlin's win was dampened by a horrific crash involving Ryan Newman, who remains hospitalized in serious condition but expected to recover. Mets and Yankees are both in Florida for spring training. Mets skipper Luis Rojas on the optimistic rehab of Yoenis Cespedes.
It's a big day for him. Big first day. We joined in the squad. When he saw Waka, he looked really good. Almost like he hasn't missed a beat facing pitchers. He's ticking the ball. He hit a shot that just went foul, a little bit up front, but he's got so much power. The ball left the yard there.
Games begin on Saturday from the Sunshine State. In college basketball, St. John saw Xavier end the game on an 8-0 run to rally 77-74 for the win at Madison Square Garden. And that's your NBC Bloomberg Sports Update. Nathan?
Thanks, Rob. It's 5:37 on Wall Street. The latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is on newsstands now with the cover on the coronavirus stressing China's fragile financial system. Tracy Alloway wrote the story for Bloomberg Business Week.
You have a lot of people here who have basically tied their careers, their money, their lives to the growth of China and its integration into the world economy. And now there seems to be a little bit of doubt creeping in as to whether that might happen to the extent or at the pace that a lot of people had expected or hoped.
Read more in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now, online at businessweek.com, and terminal customers can receive a complimentary subscription at MAG Go. Listen to Business Week with Carol Massar and Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio. Watch it on YouTube weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Get global business, finance, and tech news on your TV, computer, or mobile device at youtube.com. Search Bloomberg Global News. 5:38 on Wall Street, time for the Tri-State Business Report with Bloomberg's Ed Corey. Ed?
Morning, Nathan. New York State is giving up its challenge to the proposed $40 billion merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. That's according to several reports citing New York Attorney General Letitia James. New York, California, and other states challenged the deal, saying it would drive up prices for consumers. Well, employers who hire teens could get a tax break. In New Jersey, legislation proposed in the state Senate would allow employers who hire teenagers under the age of 18 to apply for refundable tax credits against their corporate business tax or gross income tax. Well, the Connecticut General Assembly could vote as early as Thursday on a 10-year transportation plan. It calls for 12 truck-only toll gantries. CT News Junkie reports it's still unclear, though, which chamber would take up the emergency certified bill first. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey. Nathan?
Thanks, Ed. It's 5:39 on Wall Street, and Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and on WBBM in Chicago, I'm reporting that ConAgra is cutting its sales and earnings forecast, blaming a slowdown at restaurants over the holidays.
I'm Tom Busby, and on KMOX in St. Louis, I'll be reporting on a massive jury verdict involving a Monsanto herbicide, and it's not Roundup.
I'm Caroline Hepke on Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London. We're reporting on a confrontational speech by the UK's Brexit negotiator, David Frost.
I'm Steve Podeskin on 1010 Wins in New York. We're talking about a big merger in the world of money management and investing.
I'm Ed Corey on WWJ in Detroit. I'm reporting General Motors is leaving Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand.
Those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. A risk-off morning following Apple's revenue warning on concerns about the coronavirus and its effects in China. We're going to talk more about that straight ahead with Bloomberg opinion columnist Alex Webb from our London bureau. Meantime, S&P futures are lower by 13 points. Dow futures down 141. And NASDAQ futures are lower by 74 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL Scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
A half-price dream holiday, wouldn't want to miss that. A takeaway for free, wouldn't want to miss that. And 30 gigs data for just £10 a month on Smarty Mobile. You definitely don't want to miss that. Our Smarty SIM comes packed with 30 gigs of data and unlimited calls and texts for just £10 a month on a 1-month plan. That's why Smarty won Best Value SIM-only network in the U-Switch Mobile Awards 2020. Don't miss out. Search Smarty Mobile. Smarty. Simple, honest mobile. Smarty.co.uk.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Pancake Day is flipping fun. Pancake Day is Stella. This day will be a yummy one, 'cause pancakes love Nutella.
Pancake Day is nearly here. Gather friends and family to enjoy some delicious pancakes on Tuesday, the 25th of February. And don't forget, pancakes love Nutella.
TSB's Fix and Flex loan offers one of the best rates you can get. 2.9% APR representative fixed for up to 5 years. And the freedom to pay more whenever you want, or even take a break if you like. Because no one can really predict what the future holds. On loans from £7,500 to £25,000, subject to status, UK residents only, over 21. Based on de facto data January 2020. Up to 2 repayment holidays a year subject to approval.
News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The Boy Scouts of America has filed for bankruptcy protection as it faces a barrage of new sex abuse lawsuits. Correspondent Bill Michaels has more on the filing.
That will allow the 110-year-old organization to carry on. Scores of lawyers are seeking settlements on behalf of several thousand men who say they were molested as boys by scout leaders decades ago.
A dramatic finish to this year's Daytona 500. Ryan Newman, leading the final lap, was involved in a fiery crash that saw his car spin and go airborne, flipping several times. 500 champion Denny Hamlin says his thoughts are with Newman.
We're praying for the best, and we know Ryan's a heck of a tough guy, and so we're going to hope he comes out of this good.
Newman's being treated at Halifax Medical Center. The Pearl River has crested in Jackson, Mississippi. Additional problems could arise as more rain is in the forecast. I'm John Trout.
Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow.
Is that good for American finance? What is happening with the headcount?
Right, where it counts. Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Stocks are falling in Europe along with U.S. stock index futures after Apple said quarterly sales would miss forecasts. That spooked investors who had hoped for a limited economic impact from the deadly coronavirus. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 13 points. Dow futures down 138. NASDAQ futures down 71. And the DAX in Germany's down 0.6%. 10-year Treasury up 11/30 seconds, yield 1.54%, and the yield on the 2-year 1.39%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1.6% or 84 cents at $51.21 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.3% or $4.30 at $15.90.70 an ounce. The euro 1.0831 against the dollar. The yen 109.71. And Apple is down 3.3% in early trading. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, Michael Bloomberg has qualified to join the other Democratic presidential candidates on the debate stage for the first time tomorrow night. According to an NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll, he reached 19% support in the national poll released today, his fourth with more than 10% support, meeting the DNC's threshold for qualification. Bernie Sanders is first with 31%. Michael Bloomberg is second. Joe Biden is third with 15%. We should mention Michael Bloomberg is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg Radio. The Boy Scouts of America sought bankruptcy protection to cope with the rising tide of claims tied to sexual abuse of children in its ranks. In sports, Denny Hamlin won the Daytona 500. Meanwhile, Ryan Newman is in serious condition after a horrific crash at the finish. In the NHL, the Islanders lost along with the Capitals. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's 5:49 on Wall Street. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. Columnist Alex Webb joins us live from our London bureau with more on Apple's revenue warning due to the coronavirus outbreak in China. Obviously, this is causing a risk-off sentiment in markets this morning, but how big a surprise should it be, Alex, given that when Apple put out its forecast, it was in such a wide range?
Yeah, that is the surprise, ultimately, that they had when they announced their $63 to $67 billion revenue range for the 3 months ending, or 3 months through March. They had given such a broad range with the caveat that it is that broad because of coronavirus. There are things we can't predict. Ultimately, it wasn't wide enough, it seems. They're not going to hit the low end of that number. They haven't specified what the new number might be, and the stock's trading down about 4% in out-of-hours trading.
Yeah, and we're seeing the impact as well on the tech sector more broadly. What kinds of questions should investors be asking now in terms of exposure to China?
I think it's worth looking at the supply chain and seeing, there are companies which don't actually have much manufacturing capacity in China. So a lot of very high-end semiconductor manufacturing is done in Taiwan, for instance. But those chips are then sold or imported into China for final assembly into smartphones, computers, printers, all the electronics devices that we use day in, day out. The final assembly is done there. So the extent to which that manufacturing is affected and the chip makers in particular are supplying that is something that's going to garner a lot of attention.
I mean, there had been a lot of supply chain moves over the last few months with trade tensions between the U.S. and China, hadn't there? I mean, is there a sense that that wasn't enough?
There'd been a certain recovery because it became clear that some of the most important parts of that that electronics industry weren't going to be affected or only have a limited effect. But there are also areas in China which are aren't sort of beholden to the same trade obstructions because they are in sort of special tax zones where it's easier to import and export things. I think the sense is, particularly with the iPhone, that this has affected two things. Firstly, the ability to manufacture the device because they can't get the workers into the factories. Usually they have big seasonal uplift in workers coming from all over the country to these few manufacturing hubs. But secondly, demand in China has been affected because people aren't able to get out of the house and go shopping. And particularly on that latter point, it doesn't actually affect the underlying demand. There is still a demand for these products. It's just a question of when it surfaces and when it is able to surface.
Is there a risk that with this updated guidance that Apple has difficulties meeting its targets for bringing new products online, like the low-cost iPhone or the new iPad Pro that's on the radar over the next few months?
Yeah, so that is absolutely a concern that, our Bloomberg News colleagues, Mark Gurman, Debbie Wu, have reported that Apple is going to unveil a new low-end, low-cost smartphone next month, a sort of follow-up to the iPhone SE. Tentatively, people are calling it the iPhone SE 2. If that was never like to be a blockbuster product, it's not going to drive, be the main contributor to their top line revenue, but in a sense it keeps the wolves from the door when it comes to earnings. It would plump up earnings a little bit ahead of what's expected to be a 5G enabled iPhone later this year, and we don't quite know to what extent Apple will be able to manufacture that device at the scale that it had anticipated. So I'm sure there'll be a huge amount of reporting on that in the coming weeks and months as people get a better sense of how many people have been hired and whether that meets the expectations that Apple had.
Our Bloomberg Opinion columnist Alex Webb with us this morning from London. Thank you for this. You can read more from Bloomberg Opinion at Bloomberg.com/opinion, or if you're a Bloomberg Terminal subscriber, just type OPIN GO on the search bar. Karen.
Nathan, thank you. It is 5:53 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Law Report. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Joan Doniger.
The Federal Trade Commission is beefing up enforcement of the European Union U.S. Privacy Shield. It's targeting U.S. companies for violating the framework by stating they'd taken part in the shield, but their certifications had lapsed. Washington State is looking to beef up its own privacy laws. Its privacy and data protection bill would require businesses to be, quoting now, responsible custodians of data. And a proposed class action suit against Lending Club charges the company illegally recorded phone calls from 2 states without callers' consent.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need, all on one legal research platform, including guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now other legal news we're continuing to watch is a surprise win for Amazon. A judge has temporarily blocked Microsoft from working on its $10 billion Pentagon cloud computing contract after Amazon asked for the delay. The company is challenging the validity of the award over allegations that President Trump interfered. For more on the decision, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks with Frank Murray, a partner at Foley and Lardner.
The government argued that stopping the work could compromise national security and drain taxpayer money. Just how unusual is it for a judge to order a halt to all work while the case is pending?
It's not very common. In the normal course of events, you have to make a showing that you're likely to succeed on the merits, and there's a weighing of the hardships involved as to whether it will be more prejudicial to stop the government from moving forward or to the competitor who's trying to get the contract if the contract is not stayed. So as the protester, as Amazon is here, you're always trying to get the government to press pause on the procurement so that things aren't moving forward without you and the train's leaving the station to a certain extent without you on board. But it's a pretty high showing you have to make, and that's why in most cases you try to work out with the government whether they're willing to voluntarily pause while the case is being litigated, which the government oftentimes will do because they recognize it's disruptive if you win on the protest at the end of the day and they have to go back to square one. It can be disruptive and more costly to them to start over. So sometimes they voluntarily pause. But when they're fighting you on it and say, we want to go forward, it's really important to move on, it's fairly unusual to win at that stage.
So how long might it take? How long will the work be stopped while the judge hears the case?
It's a little bit unusual in this case because they're asking for so much additional discovery. Normally in a bid protest where you're challenging a contract award, it's pretty much a paper case where you're looking at the evaluation records and the proposals and everything's done on paper. And there it's usually a 3 or 4 month process, and if there's an injunction, the government oftentimes asks the court if she'll try to handle it on a fairly expedited briefing schedule. Here you've got this whole separate issue that Amazon's raised, a further bias part of their argument, where they want to take depositions of people, and so that's unusual. That doesn't typically happen in a bid protest. So if there is going to be that level of discovery and additional depositions taken, first that issue has to be litigated and the judge has to agree, yes, I'm going to make these people give depositions. Then the depositions have to be taken and entered into the record, and then you'd have that as part of what's being looked at for the ultimate merits decision. So, it could be 6, 7, 8 months, I suppose, depending on how long the discovery takes, if that's going to happen. If the judge says, I don't need the depositions, let's move on the paper record, it's probably more 3 or 4 months.
And that's Frank Murray, a partner at Foley and Lardner, speaking with Bloomberg's June Grasso. Catch more of that interview, plus analysis of the latest legal news, by subscribing to the Bloomberg Law Podcast or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcast. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. S&P futures are down about 12 points this morning. Dow futures down 130. NASDAQ futures down 65. 10-year Treasury up 11/30 seconds. Yield 1.54%. Yield on the 2-year, 1.39%, and NYMEX crude oil down 1.5%. And Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
Influence.
They don't chant your name when you give blood or sing songs about you. But patients and their families will remember you forever. Because your blood can change their lives. We need more blood donors in Tooting, the West End and Edgware. Bleed for London. Join us today at blood.co.uk.
3, 2, 1, lift off! have you done with my OCT eye scanner? I'm supposed to be doing an eye scan with Mrs. Green.
We launched it, like you said.
Well, I meant launch it to the public, not on a rocket.
Oh.
Tell them how it takes a hospital-grade 3D image that could help detect eye conditions up to 4 years earlier.
Oh, sugar.
And that it's available at Specsavers.
Oh, and now also in outer space.
Introducing our most advanced eye exam with OCT scans. Search Specsavers OCT to find out more. Charge applies. OCT available at selected stores.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
Global stocks slump as Apple warns the coronavirus will hit sales.
New infection numbers stoke hopes that the outbreak is nearing its peak.
HSBC announces massive cost cuts with plans to slash 35,000 jobs.
U.S. futures fall, oil tumbles, and 30-year Treasury yields dip below 2%.
The Boy Scouts file for bankruptcy, plus ex-National Security Advisor Bolton warns of possible White House censorship of his memoir. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm Rob Bushka. Head in sports, the Islanders come up short in the desert. A disturbing crash at Daytona. The Yankees and Mets have officially reported to spring training.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by SEI. Asset managers can exceed new thresholds for data management, reporting, and responsiveness. Transform your business with SEI's global operating platform at SEIC.com/IMS.
And U.S. futures are tumbling to start the week, 6:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down about 13 points. Dow futures down 142. NASDAQ futures down 66. The DAX in Germany's down about 0.7%. 10-year Treasury up 11/30 seconds, yield 1.54%. The yield on the 2-year 1.39%. NYMEX crude oil's down 1.5% or 79 cents at 51.26 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.5% or $3.90 at $15.90.30 an ounce. The euro 1.0829 against the dollar. The yen 109.73. We are watching earnings from Walmart crossing the Bloomberg fourth quarter profit and revenue missing analyst estimates. We'll have details straight ahead. Nathan.
Karen, thanks. The economic hit from the coronavirus is starting to affect corporate America now. Apple says its quarterly sales will miss forecasts as the outbreak hurts both supply and demand. Some analysts predict a quick rebound, while others worry the effects could linger. Dan Ives is Managing Director of Equity Research at Wedbush Securities.
We think this is more of a timing issue, and you'll see a significant rebound to June and September in terms of iPhone demand, which would also be across the supply chain. So I view more as a timing issue rather than one that significantly dents demand.
Apple says factories in China are getting back to work slower than expected, while most of its retail stores in the country remain closed. Mehdi Hosseini is Senior Analyst at Susquehanna Financial.
This is not entirely surprising. I think the number one question is more to do with not knowing what happens to the demand. If there is a demand destruction that is going to sustain for more than 1 or 2 quarters, we could actually see more of a broad-based slowdown.
Tech stocks in Europe and Asia slid on the forecast from Apple. A flight to safety has the yield on 30-year treasuries below 2%, its lowest level since September. Alicia Garcia Herrero is Chief Asia-Pacific Economist at Natixis.
You're bound to have supply chain effects because China is at the center of the supply chain. Frankly, the stock market doesn't want to hear this news. Everybody's trying to cry at the fact that the supply chain constraints will affect them. The stock market will react. It's just a question of time.
NASDAQ futures are down 0.7% as Apple weighs on the index. Shares are down more than 3% in the pre-market.
Meantime, the coronavirus continues to spread, though the number of new cases shows signs of stabilizing. We get the very latest now from Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie in Beijing.
The total number now for China in terms of infections, almost 72,500. The numbers of fatalities, 1,868. And the numbers out of Hubei province have risen at the slowest pace since this change in methodology last week. So certainly that's a positive, but it's worth reiterating the comments that we've heard from the World Health Organization organisation have said, look, it's still too early to say if this is truly declining.
Colleges and schools in Shanghai will remain shut through March, while casinos in Macau reopen on Thursday. A top expert in China says the outbreak could peak in parts of the country this month.
Your concern over the virus and its impact on Apple weighed on stocks in Asia overnight. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally joins us from Singapore with details. Good morning, Juliet.
Good morning, Nathan and Karen. The Nikkei 225 fell 1.4% in Tokyo to 23,193 points as Apple suppliers, including TDK and Tokyo Electron, were sold off. In China, the CSI 300 gave back some of Monday's stellar gains, but still remained above pre-Lunar New Year sell-off levels. In Seoul, the Kospi was down 1.5% as President Moon Jae-in said the spreading of the coronavirus is an emergency for South Korea's economy and called for extraordinary steps to minimize its impact. In Singapore, I'm Juliet Saleh, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Juliet, thank you. In London, HSBC is warning the outbreak will impact performance this year. We spoke exclusively with Chief Financial Officer Ewan Stevenson.
I do think we're going to have to take some additional provisions this quarter as a result of that, but very much a call on how long does the virus continue for.
At the same time, HSBC is announcing a dramatic overhaul. It plans to slash about 35,000 jobs at underperforming units in the U.S. and Europe.
We're going to be quite surgical and ruthless in terms of targeting those parts of the business where we're not generating acceptable returns. We're going to take those risk-weighted assets and reinvest them in parts of the business where we can see much better returns.
HSBC is targeting cost reductions of $4.5 billion over a 3-year period. For more on those cuts and exactly where they could hit, we bring in Bloomberg London finance reporter Harry Wilson.
You're really looking here at Europe and the US, and in particular looking at the investment bank where a lot of these cuts are going to come. Quite a bit of this could come through some asset disposals. We obviously know that the French retail bank is on the block, and then you've also got chatter about Turkey, Oman, and several other countries which could also be cut. So it's not hard to see how they get to that 35,000 job cut number.
And with those reductions in the U.S. and Europe, HSBC plans to accelerate investment in Asia despite risks from protests in Hong Kong and the coronavirus outbreak. We get more from Bloomberg opinion columnist Marcus Ashworth.
It's doubling down on its Asia presence. That's where it makes all its money. 90% of its profits have traditionally always come from Hong Kong. It's quite a gamble in theory with regards to what happens as far as China's economy and Hong Kong in particular. But nonetheless, it's telling you that it's too tough for the scale of its risk-weighted assets and its capital it has in Europe that it can make better money in a less competitive, more monopolistic market share that it has in Asia.
HSBC is taking more than $7 billion in charges related to the restructuring. Shares are down more than 6% in London.
And more on those earnings from Walmart we mentioned earlier. Earnings per share missed estimates, as did forward guidance for comparable sales. Walmart shares are down 0.75% in early trading. Futures are moving lower ahead of the open as well. Straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg. And at 6:07 on Wall Street, Michael Barr has more on what's going on